Am late, yet again. I always calculate my time to leave, but I can never manage to arrive punctually. By the time Si Nyen entered the studio, everything was already set up. Ching Chen was engaged in conversation with the spokesperson, Jinwen. As the shoot involved potato chips, he had even taken the time to eat a few, demonstrating the expressions one makes while eating. The two seemed quite familiar with each other after a brief exchange. They fell into a rhythm, sharing chips and chatting animatedly. Over the past few years, Ah Wen's worth had skyrocketed. Just a single day of shooting could net her millions, and naturally, her temperament had also become more demanding. During her last collaboration with another director, she had sulked when asked to perform a leaping motion, protesting that it did not align with her public image. But look at her today, she seemed like a friendly neighbor's daughter. I suspect that if asked to climb a pole, she would readily agree with a nod. It's always better to have a renowned director, mused a nearby assistant. Chunwon has a reputation for being difficult, yet look how cooperative she is today. Si Nyen merely hummed in response, prompting the assistant to curiously inquire, "Miss, they seem quite close. Do you think there might be some rumors surrounding them?" She flashed a grin and pointed to her throat. The assistant suddenly realized, isn't she better now? Didn't she just eat a throat lozenge? Lozenges aren't medicine. Seeing the assistant's expression as if she believed Cheng's lozenges cure all ailments, Si Nyen chose to remain silent. Thus, on this Saturday morning at 7 a.m., she stood in the studio, feigning illness while observing Ching Chan at work. I must admit, he is not merely a name without substance. For a director like him, it is quite likely he had taken on this commercial ad as a favor for a friend, earning a bit of pocket money in the process. Yet, his meticulous instruction and guidance to Chunwon and even the minor background actors demonstrated his attention to detail, leaving nothing overlooked. At that moment, he sat in a chair, flipping through the shooting script, his gaze glued to the monitor's display. The slight furrow of his brow felt achingly familiar. When Chunwon finally bit down on her 107th chip, she couldn't contain her displeasure and let her face fall. However, Ching Chen continued to scrutinize the playback on the monitor. "Your expressions are becoming increasingly rigid," he advised. "You need to imagine the feeling of first love." He paused before elaborating. "There are no prior experiences to draw from, leading to nervousness, caution, anxiety, yet also anticipation, whether it be sweet or bitter." His earnestness elicited a series of raised eyebrows from the producers standing nearby. Si Nyen cast an anxious glance at Ching Chen. What a ridiculous concept. Why must it always revolve around the theme of first love? These past few days felt unbearably suffocating. Was it merely an innocent crush from youth? Two voices within her seemed to argue fiercely, each staking its claim. One advocated for acceptance after all. We're all adults, right? Who still harbors grudges against youthful folly. The other insisted on steadfast resistance, declaring that acknowledgement would be too embarrassing. Outsiders might think she was seeking to reattach herself to a former flame's success. If he were just a junior office worker, striving to pay off a mortgage in a drab high-rise, she would undoubtedly acknowledge the past gracefully, inviting him to an intimate CAF to recount their once misguided romance. Perhaps they would share a laugh, reminiscing about times gone by, before moving on. Yet why is it that they might unexpectedly cross paths when he is thriving, particularly in fields where their lives have intertwined countless times, achieving remarkable success? Isn't it often said that encounters with first loves inevitably lead to disillusionment? Why then does this adage morph into a paradox in her case? The more Si Nyen pondered, the more suffocating her thoughts became. She felt she had been silent, merely harboring a few complaints, yet inexplicably, Ching Chen turned his head in her direction. Caught off guard, she immediately redirected her gaze to the monitor, pretending to observe. Ching Chen casually picked up a water bottle, twisting it open for a sip. "What do you think?" he inquired. Just then, a shot concluded, and the lighting and props crew rushed onto the set to prepare the next scene. The producer between them misinterpreted the question as directed at himself, eagerly professing the scene's perfection. It wasn't until the third perfect that he realized his misinterpretation. Si Nyen initially thought the producer's interjection would allow her to withdraw into silence, but those attentive eyes remained fixed on her, as if he genuinely cared for her opinion. Reluctantly, she offered an okay hand gesture. Then, she promptly retrieved a small tin, opened it, and ate a throat lozenge. The studio resembled a time warp, with no clear marker of day or night, and naturally, no one noticed the passage of time. When the assistant finally brought in the box lunches, everyone realized it was already 1 p.m. Given Chen Wen's lofty status, the production company had arranged a private lounge for her, yet she unexpectedly chose to be down to earth, dining with everyone in the communal area, even generously sharing her home-cooked nourishment. After some idle chit-chat, the producer suddenly recalled something, pointing at Xin Yan. Miss, who plays multiple roles and is also the screenwriter, perhaps will have an opportunity to collaborate on a film or series in the future. Oh no, Xin Yan felt as if her heart were bleeding, raising her head to manage a smile. Maintaining silence has been quite challenging, but thankfully, the ad cycle is short. It will all conclude in one day. Once today is over, she will be free. With practiced deftness, she gingerly peeled the skin off the chicken with her chopsticks, then began to remove the skin from the fish, showcasing 20 years of acquired skill. To outsiders, her pickiness may seem excessive, yet to her, it is simply a mechanism for maintaining calm. If only she could occupy herself for an hour while everyone else resumed working, perhaps the discomfort would dissipate. Chunwon, being a singer, could never resist steering the conversation towards music. Chung Chun, though only occasionally chiming in, surprisingly exhibited insightful commentary. I used to love forming bands as a child, particularly Nirvana songs, but they disbanded long ago, Chunwon remarked wistfully, turning to Chung Chun. Director Chung, who do you enjoy listening to? Wang Fei, Chung Chun mused thoughtfully. I would. That tune surged through Xin Yan's mind, bringing back a melody too familiar. Longing is a kind of ethereal entity that shadows our existence. Just as she was taking a sip of soup, she accidentally burned her tongue. Her name had always been a source of playful teasing since childhood. Every time someone reached out to her carelessly, she would seethe, except during her time with him. Whenever she felt irritable, he'd incessantly send lyrics through QQ, invariably infused with the theme of longing. Each time he bombarded her with those lines, her anger would vanish, replaced with laughter. How naive of her. Was it the rainy season inspiring a swell of melancholic sentiment? After savoring the ribs until not a shred of meat remained, she finally discarded the bones onto the table, moving on to the next rib. The South had just entered the plum rain season, with intermittent showers. Around 4, someone absent-mindedly remarked on the rain, which she hadn't paid much attention to. Little did she expect that by the end of the day, the outside world would be transformed into a torrent, rendering it impossible to hail a cab, even with an umbrella in hand. Inside the studio, people were swiftly gathering their belongings. Those who had driven were already leaving in 2s and 3s. She had always relied on taxis for transportation, which had been convenient. Yet on rainy or snowy days, this became a source of frustration. Did you drive here? Someone suddenly asked from behind her. Where did you park? Feeling exasperated, she replied, I took a taxi, but given the current situation, they'll have to wait for the rain to subside before I can find a cab. After speaking, she turned to glance back. The world fell into a profound silence. Amidst the heavy downpour, people were hastily shedding their clothes to cover their heads as they dashed towards the parking lot. Amidst farewells and loud discussions of tomorrow's agenda, Chung Chin lingered just a couple of steps behind her, seemingly waiting for the rain to lessen. When he caught Xin Yan looking back at him, he smiled. I didn't drive either. His expression, from the depths of his eyes to the curve of his smile, bore no indication of anything unusual. Xin Yan let out a soft "oh," turning her focus back to the rain, with her heart in turmoil. Apparently, he had long forgotten her voice. Relief mingled with a sense of loss. Perhaps everyone has imagined the dream of meeting a former lover after many years, hoping to remain unforgettable in their hearts, wishing they would love only her in this life. As the crowd thinned out, the studio lay desolate, leaving just the two of them standing at the entrance. When the producer emerged after wrapping things up, he immediately understood upon seeing them, it must be difficult to catch a taxi in such heavy rain. Wait here, I'll arrange for someone to drive you. With that, he pulled out his phone and began dialing. Chung Chun removed his glasses, using his shirt to wipe the raindrops from the lenses. After all these years, you still remain so particular. Xin Yan instinctively responded with a murmur, but once the weight of his words sunk in, she was taken aback. He, however, wore a relaxed demeanor as he adjusted his glasses. Are you doing well?
Chapter 2. The heavy patter of rain and the distant sound of someone talking on the phone behind me were subdued by that simple question. How have you been? In truth, life had been quite good. No one would be so disheartened by the failure of their first love. Over the years, I continued to eat well and sleep soundly, pursuing education and work. A myriad of hazy thoughts flitted through my mind, how I had been under scrutiny for a year. Nearly losing my sanity, only to find that he had deleted his gaming account, his QQ forever greyed out, and I had no idea which university he attended or even what city he resided in. Yet, after all is said and done, it boiled down to the most mundane of responses. "Not bad," she replied vaguely, tossing the question back to him. "What about you? You see, time not only murders beauty but also severs the tongue that speaks truth." He glanced at her. She still dared not meet his gaze, yet she felt the weight of his stare, momentarily feeling a flutter of unease, wondering if he held a grudge. Then she heard him say, "I am getting by, getting by, getting by. When old flames reunite, shouldn't the exchanges be filled with 'How are you?' 'I'm well, I'm good too,'" yet he had to utter such a phrase. She was at a loss for words and could only force a laugh, saying, "You're being modest, you've been thriving these past few years." Later, they both got into the car. Nyan intentionally chose the left side by the window, creating a two-seat buffer between them while Cheng Chen sat across, engaging in light chatter with the producer. In snippets of conversation, she discovered that he had been living in Shanghai for 5 or 6 years. And both their homes were in the same district, merely a 10-minute drive apart. This string of revelations left her somewhat astonished. One might ponder the vastness of the world, once in Beijing, now in Shanghai. Yet she could not find him. But how small the world felt when their paths crossed like this. How had he recognized her? She cast a fleeting glance at Cheng Chen, just as he tapped the back of the seat in front, signaling his arrival. To avoid further awkwardness, she declined all involvement with the advertisement, color grading, editing, and other related tasks. In summary, she eliminated every opportunity to meet Cheng Chen. How had he managed to identify her? Xinyan lifted her water cup, racking her brain for an answer. But to no avail. She took a sip, shifting her thoughts to another question. When he finally saw her face, was he disappointed or relieved? The television was playing "If You Are the One," the host chuckling merrily, oblivious to the content of his words. Although aware that much of it was mere sensationalism, she found herself drawn to the spectacle. Under the spotlight, everyone on stage voiced sentiments they would typically suppress. A fleeting moment could seal a lifetime. Where was the abundance of love at first sight? Lost in her tangled emotions regarding Cheng Chen, she was fervently sipping hot water when the doorbell rang abruptly. Before she could rise, someone outside began to knock impatiently. Nyan opened the door to find an elderly couple glaring at her. "Young lady, your place is leaking." "No, it isn't," she replied, but as soon as the words left her lips, she noticed what appeared to be a thin layer of water on the kitchen tiles. Turning on the light revealed that the water dispenser's fruit barrel had been completely emptied. She had forgotten to turn it off after pouring, after a flurry of chaotic cleaning, still clad in her pajamas. Xinyan was dragged downstairs by the irate couple. The kitchen ceiling below was already dripping, but thankfully, it was a timely discovery, with the leak having just begun, for damages caused by her oversight. She knew she had to take responsibility, yet, to her surprise, the couple was unyielding, not only claiming that the entire kitchen was seeping water but also insisting that due to the leak, all the furniture in the 3-bedroom apartment had been affected and needed replacing, along with a complete repainting of the room, including new wallpaper. On the yellowed kitchen walls, only tiny beads of water were visible. Were their demands not excessively extortionate? But before her stood a pair of over 70-year-old individuals, with a throng of curious neighbors gathering at the door, leaving her with little room to argue. Just when she thought it couldn't get any worse, her phone rang again. "What's the matter?" she asked, half covering the phone, her voice low. "The film is ready, come over to confirm. Is tomorrow all right?" She truly could not be certain she could fend off such a horde of people. "Hurry over, you've taken leave for the whole process. You must come to see the final version." The producer's tone was emphatic, and then added, "The director is leaving early tomorrow. Whether the house is on fire or flooded, you must come, please. Little M. Bring us dinner. We have 13 people here." The phone line was abuzz with activity, and on her end the chaos was no less extreme. Yet, against her better judgment, she found herself saying she had an urgent matter to attend to and, reluctantly, handed over her apartment's security door key, breaking free from the crowd. It was peak dining time at the restaurant, and she lingered for quite some time between the set meals and the la carte menu, ultimately gritting her teeth and deciding to queue for a table. When she held the menu, the The waitress, upon hearing it was for 13, immediately beamed and rattled off a string of dishes when she spotted Mao Shuiwang from the mountain city. She recalled Cheng Chen's fondness for it. After all, she had already ordered nearly every signature dish. Adding one more Walden tea matter with the appetite of 13 people, they ended up with 4 large bags of takeout boxes. Prompting the taxi driver to chuckle, "Are you moving the restaurant home, young lady? I'm starving. After this delivery, I might just die from hunger." When all the dishes arrived, her companions indeed marveled amidst the chorus of Sai Nyan. "I love you." She casually glanced at the editing room. The door was ajar, and from her angle, she could see 2 figures inside, their screens replaying the advertisement footage. A world of raucousness outside contrasted sharply with the oppressive silence within. Director Cheng, the producer, just brought out the grandest bowl of food. "Look at our little M, so bold as to pack this massive bowl of Mao Shuiwang. That taxi is likely to smell of it all night." Chen Chen whispered a few words to the editor, then stood up and walked out. "I love this dish. What a coincidence," the producer chuckled. "This must be fate." The crowd was puzzled, glancing back at the grinning producer. Chen Chen casually clicked the cap back on his pen, stowing it in his pocket, and said to Sai Nyan, "You can take a look now." Sai Nyan replied with a solemn, "Thank you for your hard work." Director Cheng, after a whirlwind of activity, she suddenly remembered the mess awaiting her at home, the security door key still in the hands of the elderly couple, although she had taken precautions by installing 2 doors for safety. The outer key was with them, and she had no idea what humiliating compromises she'd have to make to regain entry. The pressing concern was that Kohler was still locked in the bedroom, unattended, and she worried whether it would become frantic from hunger. She had never been adept at handling such minor disputes. She always preferred to keep the peace. Yet, this time, the elderly couple seemed to demand far too much, almost 3 to 4 months' worth of her salary. But if she refused, would they not disrupt the committee with their incessant complaints? Would that not lead to endless unrest? However, agreeing to such extortionate demands would surely bring disgrace among her university peers, rendering her education in law utterly futile. The more she contemplated, the more burdensome it felt. She leaned against the terrace railing, lost in thought. Most crucially, if Kohler grew desperate, it would undoubtedly tear apart the sheets and blankets in a fit of rage. The terrace, adjacent to Taikang Road, offered glimpses of vibrant life through the gaps in the sycamore trees. Watching the bustling bar across the street, the impending awkwardness of the evening weighed heavily on her mind. A few individuals stepped onto the terrace, spotting Sai Nyan slumped there, her eyes glued to the lively bar. They laughed. "Looks like Miss Nightlife is quite active." Sai Nyan, feeling downcast, lifted her head to see their satisfied expressions, which irked her even more. But upon seeing Cheng Chen and another man enter, her irritation dissipated. Cheng Chen was not one for many words. He often preferred to listen. It was unclear who first mentioned pets, but the producer brought up Cheng Chen's sheepdog, prompting him to smile. "I've been out these past few days and still don't know who to entrust it to. It doesn't he like staying at the pet shop?" "Of course, you can leave it with Miss," the producer chimed in. "You 2 live quite close, don't you? It'd be easy to drop it off." "How straightforward you are." Sai Nyan exchanged polite smiles with Cheng Chen. "But that won't do. I have a cat at home," she insisted, trying to sound sincere, "and she tends to be rather temperamental." "Don't you have other friends?" he asked, holding a can of beer, pausing just before bringing it to his lips, revealing a hint of amusement. "All men, not very considerate." "All men? Well, yes, all men." Sai Nyan glanced up at the moon. "Fine, I owe you one. I'll see if I can send my cat to a friend's place for a couple of days." Chapter 3. As a result, after exchanging numerous details, she realized he was taking a flight tonight, meaning that the dog had to be delivered to her home without delay. The problem was, she didn't even have her house keys. Chen Chen pulled out his car keys, and she hesitantly said, "The dog can come over, but I need 2 hours to sort out some personal matters first." For reasons unknown, she subconsciously wished to keep her predicament from him. The sound of the car unlocking echoed. Cheng Chen opened the passenger door for her. "What's wrong? Is it inconvenient?" "Not really," she continued. "It's just that I have some people at home I need to handle before you come." Besides, she needed to calm Kohler down first. Cheng Chen gestured for her to get in. "Then I'll take you home first. It's on the way." Indeed, it was a convenient route. Resolving her issue sooner would allow her to take over his dog without delay. As Xin Yan contemplated, she ultimately ceased her refusal. Chen Chen closed the car door for her before making his way around to the other side. Once the vehicle was in motion, music began to play automatically. The rhythm was tranquil, accompanied solely by the monotonous strumming of a guitar and the soft humming of a young girl in an unfamiliar language. She could not discern the song, only feeling that the sound quality was exceedingly gentle. Inside, neon lights flickered, each frame rushing past the window. Cheng Chen remained largely silent, and feeling quite bored, she picked up the shooting script she had carelessly tossed onto the passenger seat, reading intently from the front page all the way to the end. When she finally closed the script, she noticed that the back included a contact sheet. It was a simple form, typically meant to prevent difficulties in locating individuals during filming, facilitating communication. Normally, she would have overlooked this. But as she flipped through it absent-mindedly, a name startled her. On the third line, Xin Yan, accompanied by a string of phone numbers. So, he had indeed seen it early on. Xin Yan stared at her own name. Feeling warmth wash over her. On the first day of the meeting, he had been perusing this script, seemingly oblivious, but in retrospect, it was clear he must have known. She placed the script behind her and discreetly glanced at him. Chen Chen was focused on the rearview mirror, maneuvering the car off the overpass when he suddenly asked, "Right turn at the intersection ahead." She instinctively replied within millimeter, and as the car turned the corner, they passed a Howder convenience store. I remembered I need to buy some things for home. Just drop me off here, please. The store was just ahead, and walking back would take only 5 minutes. Additionally, she could purchase some items to demonstrate her sincerity. Cheng Chen pressed the brakes. "Is it truly inconvenient? If it would cause you trouble, we can skip it." The car came to a steady halt in front of the convenience store. She paused for a moment. She had initially mentioned needing to resolve personal matters at home, but now she was deliberately avoiding having him take her to her doorstep. Did he mistakenly believe someone was at her home? There was nothing inconvenient about it. She pretended to gaze out the window, but in reality, she was observing his reflection through the glass, merely needing to clear up some misunderstandings with a neighbor. He turned his head, casting a glance her way. Though his expression was inscrutable, it made her heart flutter twice. "Wait for my call, I'll reach out once I've sorted things out." With that, he exited the car without looking back, striding purposefully into the convenience store. The situation was far from the simplicity she had anticipated. An elderly couple had summoned 3 pairs of daughters and sons-in-law. 8 people encircling her at the entrance. Whenever they spoke passionately, it evoked a sense of their 8-nation alliance reappearing. No matter how eloquently she spoke, she could not withstand the onslaught of 8 voices. She lamented internally, thinking that had she known, she would have invited a few young girls to bolster her presence. Time passed swiftly, and after 2 hours the 8 individuals showed no signs of relenting. She glanced at the clock, growing increasingly anxious. Initially, she intended to leave a key for her neighbor as a gesture of goodwill, but now she found herself entangled in a web of complications, fearing that Cheng Chen might wait too long and miss his flight. She discreetly sent him a text, "You might have to wait a bit longer, I haven't resolved things here yet." The reply came promptly, "I'm downstairs. Which floor are you on?" After a moment's hesitation, she responded, "I live on the 13th floor, I'm currently on the 12th, why don't you bring the dog up?" She had thought he would come up merely to deliver the dog. But when a robust shepherd dog emerged from the elevator first, the situation spiraled beyond her control. Cheng Chen stepped out of the elevator, and due to his naturally tall stature, he stood out vividly in the warm yellow light of the corridor. Having been overwhelmed for 2 hours, upon seeing his smile directed at her, she instinctively moved behind him. The shepherd sniffed her, wagging its tail excitedly. She grinned, reaching out to stroke the dog's head. This dog was splendid, it could discern good from evil. Cheng Chen spoke little, directly stating he wanted to inspect the damage in her apartment. The group had prepared in advance and immediately allowed him to enter. The ceiling and walls were devoid of dripping water, yet the floor was exaggeratedly lined with over 10 plastic basins, most filled halfway with water, showcasing the recent chaos. Xin Yan frowned. This family would be well suited to work as props in a film crew. Their depiction was quite realistic. Cheng Chen, however, merely glanced up twice. "I will hire someone to assess the damage tomorrow. We'll discuss compensation once the report is ready. We won't shy away from our responsibilities." With that statement, he removed his glasses and neatly folded them into his shirt pocket. This singular gesture effectively concluded the discussion. He led the dog out the front door, and Sai Nhan, still processing the events, followed suit. Understanding the need to be discreet, the group stood in stunned silence for 3 seconds before comprehending a crucial fact. With this man present, they would gain no advantage. In fact, it was likely they would ultimately forfeit any compensation. Their bravado swiftly diminished. As the two entered the elevator, the elderly lady hurriedly pressed the door button, smiling as she proclaimed they were neighbors and everything could be amicably resolved. Thus, the stalemate that had persisted for 2 hours was overturned by Cheng Chen in a mere 2 minutes. Until she returned home, she couldn't help but marvel at the situation. They had assumed that as a young girl, she could be easily taken advantage of. Cheng Chen half squatted down, removing the collar from the dog's neck, remarking that sometimes a man was needed to resolve issues. This was a truth she was well aware of, yet it was unreasonable to always rely on her parents to address various problems. The moment the shepherd was freed, it began to roam the house, sniffing around without any hesitation. She approached the kitchen intending to pour water for it, only to recall that the water dispenser had long since run dry. Reluctantly, she opened the refrigerator. "I only have cola. Would you prefer to wait while I go downstairs to buy some water?" There was no immediate response from outside. She propped herself against the refrigerator door, peering into the living room. "Never mind, cola will do. I occasionally indulge in it as well." He was seated at the corner of the sofa, with the wall lamp casting a warm glow, elongating his shadow. The dog seemed to have explored enough and had settled contentedly by his feet, with both man and dog appearing entirely at ease, as if in their own home. Sai Nhan uttered an "oh," bending down to retrieve the cola and 2 glasses. The condensation from the can left her palms damp. To prevent the bedspread from being shredded by the cat, she placed the cola on the coffee table, then cradled the cat into the kitchen, ensuring it ate and drank sufficiently before carrying it back into the living room. My cat has a bit of a temper, so be cautious of scratches, she explained, feeling somewhat embarrassed. "Look how gentle your dog is." Just as she was inwardly chastising herself for her inadequate training, the cat, which had been curled up in her arms, suddenly let out a sharp meow. Instantly becoming agitated, startled, she loosened her grip, and the white streak darted straight for the dog. This was a disaster. Sai Nhan instinctively chased after it, just as she was about to catch the cat. Cheng Chen had already reached out, grasping the cat by the scruff of its neck, pulling it away from the dog while steadying Sai Nhan with his other hand. Both the cat and Sai Nhan were effectively restrained. The small white bundle of fur in his hand flailed its paws angrily. Sai Nhan felt the warmth of his palm, a bit flustered, initially believing he would release her first before addressing the cat. But to her surprise, he merely gazed at the feline, raising an eyebrow seriously. 2 seconds later, the universe's most formidable cat had capitulated, its tail swaying in a conciliatory manner. "Just a paper tiger," he declared with a smile. Glancing at Sai Nhan, his black and white eyes held a hint of warmth. Sai Nhan stared at him, realizing that he was entirely different when he smiled compared to when he did not. Had the people downstairs witnessed such a smile, they would certainly no longer feel intimidated by him. He released her, and she quickly straightened, pouring the cola into a glass and handing it to him. The white foam bubbled up with a delicate fizz, joyfully rising from the bottom of the glass. In that fleeting moment, she truly observed the real him. Aside from the overly familiar features, everything else felt entirely foreign. This sensation was peculiar. She had once harbored deep affection for him, a kind of love she believed would never be replicated. She still recalled every word exchanged between them, yet the sensation of his speech, his posture, even the way he held her, all felt utterly unfamiliar. Their conversation meandered without touching upon the past, remaining centered on work. The cat nestled at his feet, dozing off, seemingly oblivious to its daily provider. The shepherd would occasionally lift its head, sniffing the cat and then glancing at Sai Nhan before resuming its pretense of sleep. After bidding farewell to Cheng Chen, she collapsed onto her bed. Suddenly recalling an important question, she promptly sent him a text. "I forgot to ask, what is your dog's name?" After a prolonged wait, her phone vibrated with a response. Shuabai, staring at her phone, she felt utterly stunned. Back then, she would often lie on the balcony, regardless of the season, continuously sipping cola, while he would be on the other end of the line, sternly lecturing her about the unhealthiness of cola. In a fit of frustration, she had jokingly mentioned wanting to name a future cat Cola, simply because he disliked cats. He had chuckled and replied, All right, then I shall raise a dog named Shuebai, a perfect pair. Chapter 4, Kohler and Shuebai wrapped in her blanket. She struggled through her memories for several hours before finally drifting off to sleep as dawn broke. Just as she fell asleep, she felt a warmth in her fingers. Struggling to open her eyes, she discovered Shuebai at the edge of her bed, wagging its tail and nibbling on her fingers with bright, sparkling eyes. Startled, she locked eyes with the dog for several seconds, gradually becoming more alert. She moved her legs, noticing that Kohler was still sound asleep, not even lifting an eyelid. "Shuebai, what do you want?" she inquired. Shuebai continued to wag its tail, wagging and wagging. Glancing at her phone, she noted it was only 7 o'clock. Surely the dog wasn't he hungry already? The dog food had been poured out last night, and water was also prepared. A bathroom break? A poop? Cheng Chen had mentioned this dog could go to the toilet on its own, and it had no issues with a squat toilet. Ultimately, in her drowsiness, she surrendered and called Cheng Chen. Amidst the soothing strains of music, he remained unresponsive to the call. Si Nyan placed the phone against her cheek, closed her eyes, and waited. Within moments, she began to drift into a blissful slumber, only to be roused by a sudden hello from the other end. With her eyes still shut, she hoarsely inquired, "Your dog is nibbling on my fingers, preventing me from sleeping. What does it desire?" Cheng Chen's voice was clear and seemingly already engaged in his work. Responding to someone asking the director about various matters, he first addressed their inquiries before replying to Sign Yarn. "It probably wants to go for a walk. I take it out every morning." Si Nyan stifled a yawn, resisting the urge to succumb to fatigue. What happens if it doesn't go out? Her initial reluctance to adopt a dog stemmed from the fear of the daily hassle of walking one. He paused thoughtfully before candidly admitting, "I don't know, I've never tried." Clinging to a flicker of hope, Nyan buried herself under the covers and rolled over to return to sleep. However, the outcome was inevitable. She was soon playfully nibbled from head to toe by Sprite. Consequently, she had no choice but to take her still groggy cat, Coco, and lead Sprite downstairs. By 10 o'clock, upon returning home, she had intended to collapse into bed when another call from Shen Weijue interrupted her. "Are you awake?" She was on the verge of tears from exhaustion. "No, I just took my first love's dog for a walk and was about to sleep." There was a silence of 3 seconds on the other end, followed by a flurry of commotion. "Are you kidding? Just yesterday, I filmed a segment on marriage law, expressing despair over love, and here you are with a romantic encounter. Is the iron tree blooming? Has Nyan fallen in love?" "Listen closely, it's my first love, and we broke up years ago." Although they had never formally uttered the words break up. "Oh," Shen Weichu's tone abruptly shifted, her attitude doing a complete about-face. "If that's the case, don't you harbor any fantasies? Just the other day, a colleague of mine worked on a case with a similar backdrop. Men tend to reminisce about their first loves, even after marriage, while still flirting around, all the while claiming to be single for years when in reality their wives are abroad." Shen Weijue passionately elaborated on the case while Sign Yarn listened with half an ear, yet felt as if she had been awakened by a stark realization. Many years had passed. Back then he was in his senior year of high school and she was merely a freshman, both still innocent children unaware of the complexities of the world. How far had they both traveled since their parting? How many people had they encountered? What lives had they led? Certainly, it was far beyond the superficial snippets offered by entertainment news. Sunlight streamed through the glass window, illuminating the room as Coco flipped onto his back, continuing to doze. And no matter what Shen Weijue said, her words barely registered with Sign Yan. After hanging up, she emulated Coco, cocooning herself in the comfort of her blankets to catch up on sleep. Her once steadfast routine had been altered time and again due to Sprite. A week passed, and both she and Coco found themselves in a state of melancholy from the relentless upheaval. On Friday, with little to occupy her at work, she ventured to Liu Xia's office, sporting 2 alarming dark circles under her eyes. The previous book had been printed, and she had reserved 1,000 signed copies. The thought of her beautiful handwriting filled her with shame, and she had postponed signing them. Eventually, she had pushed Liu Xia to the brink, compelling him to come to her home to retrieve her. "Your dog," Liu Xia said, sitting across from Sign Yan, visibly shaken, "is terrifying. I mean, you didn't buy it just to guard against fire, theft, and Liu Xia, did you?" Sign Yan gripped her pen, fervently practicing her handwriting on a blank sheet. "Oh please. My Coco adores you. That shepherd dog belongs to someone else. It will be taken away this weekend. She glanced at the books filling the conference room, mentally calculating the feeding schedule for Coco and Sprite. Thus, as Lucia rambled on about how Sprite had been a whirlwind of energy yesterday, frightening her into never wanting to approach dogs again, she finally managed to complete her tasks just before midnight. Self-inflicted misery. She sighed as she signed the last book, exhaling in relief. I cannot bear this. Writing scripts is far more appealing. Once I finish, I need not concern myself with anything else. You production teams can do as you wish. It is of no consequence to me. Lucia organized the books, chuckling. Once the interview airs, the most frequently asked question will be Yarn rolled her eyes. Who is the inspiration, right? My wish has been fulfilled. Even if you attempt to silence me, it will not intimidate me. Is this all you aspire to? Not interested in being a bestseller? That remains to be seen, Yan replied, capping her pen. I wrote this book because a good friend once said that writing sweet stories and reading them will make life sweeter. So I penned it, and that's sufficient. She glanced at Lucia and smiled. Just like me, constantly reminding myself to lose weight. I haven't gained a pound in all these years. Lucia initially pondered her words but suddenly became incensed at her last remark. Do not discriminate against the overweight. Hey, I'm not lying. An American fitness star said just that. If he simply psychologically affirms that he will lose weight each day, he truly does. The key is to think I will lose weight, rather than I cannot lose weight. A book was tossed in her direction, followed by a loud exclamation. If you damage it, you'll pay. Tomorrow, sign 500 more. As the clock neared midnight, she refrained from provoking Lucia further. Grabbing her bag and exiting, upon arriving home she found Sprite had been left starving, sprawled on the floor dozing, while Coco lay directly on his back, sound asleep. She tiptoed into the kitchen, reaching for the milk powder container, only to find both the cat and dog trailing closely behind her. Since the last incident with the water dispenser, she had not dared to use it for a week, resorting instead to boiling water with an electric kettle. Its only purposes were to make coffee for herself and milk for the cat and dog. Sprite, being rather large, had to be taken to the pet shop for a bath recently, and to her dismay, he returned with a cold. After watching him finish his milk, she prepared a concoction of banlangan with some fruit, hoping to coax him to eat, but despite her efforts, he stubbornly refused a single bite. The large dog lay there, listless, appearing even more pitiful. She had exhausted her repertoire of soothing words, yet his eyelids remained heavy, and he continued to cough softly. Cheng Chen was returning the next day. She had taken care of him for an entire week without incident, only for him to fall ill on the final day. She pondered for a long time before reluctantly dialing his number. At this hour, Cheng Chen answered swiftly, his voice tinged with fatigue. Is something wrong? Your Yan sighed. Has caught a cold. I thought I should inform you first. Has he ever had a cold before? I tried giving him medicine but he completely ignored me. He paused briefly. What are the symptoms? His nose is dry. I took him to the vet and they said it was a cold. Yan recalled the veterinarian's words from the afternoon, stating it was not serious and that she should simply feed him some banlangan mixed with fruit. He started coughing when I got home. She hesitated, feeling it was best to be honest about his condition, especially since the coughing was quite severe. He chuckled. Do you have some Niancian's pie par gao at home? Niancian. What a coincidence. Yes, I do. Wait a moment. There was a sound of a door crashing shut, and he continued, mix it in a 3-to-1 ratio with warm water for him to drink. Yan responded with an oh. I'm driving. I'll call you back in a bit. He hung up quickly. And Yan finally glanced at the time, past 1 in the morning. She realized she had called rather late. Following Cheng Chen's instructions, she placed the bowl of water before Sprite, who sniffed it a couple of times before slowly beginning to lap it up. Once Sprite finished drinking, she took the bowl to the kitchen to wash it. Just as she turned on the tap, her phone rang again. He truly called back. Yan pressed to answer, wedging the phone between her shoulder and neck. You really didn't need to call back. Yes, fine now. His tone was calm as he asked, did he finish drinking? He did. She rinsed the bowl, drying it with a white towel and setting it aside to air dry. Once everything was tidied up, she opened the door. I'm here. Ho, Yan repeated those words in disbelief. You're outside. By the time she processed this, the call had already disconnected. She hurriedly tossed the towel onto the counter and dashed down the corridor, hesitating at the door. Should she change out of her sportswear, Would wearing something more formal seem overly pretentious at this late hour? Stay calm, Nyan. Stay calm. He is merely a friend, albeit the timing is somewhat peculiar. Taking a deep breath, she cracked the door open, only for a white blur to dart past her. The silhouette at the door obscured much of the corridor's light. He casually patted Sprite and looked down at her. I just arrived. I haven't had the chance to change. Exhaustion seeped through his voice, low yet unmistakably clear. She stood speechless, gazing at him. He was clad in dark green hiking pants, matching shoes, and carried a large travel bag, indeed a weary traveller. Did you just get here? Caught off guard, she had no intention of letting him in. He cleared his throat awkwardly and said, I had just arrived home downstairs when I received your call. So I came straight over. Afterward, noticing Nyan continued to gaze at him, he slightly lifted his chin, silently asking if he might come inside. As Nyan, realizing, hurriedly stepped aside. I took Sprite to the pet shop for a bath the day before yesterday. He probably wasn't dried off properly. Since you're here as the dog owner, I should admit my fault. I've been quite busy these past few days, and I didn't expect it to escalate so quickly today. Sprite cooperated, coughing twice, which only added to her embarrassment. Cheng Chen settled onto the sofa. It's all right. He tends to catch colds every autumn, and I've grown accustomed to it. Nyan recalled Coco's frail little body. My cat is the same. He often falls ill, but that's because he was severely injured when I first brought him home, leaving lasting repercussions. Cheng Chen took a sip of water and, upon hearing those words, repeated, severe injury? Nyan nodded, cradling the adorable Keel, who was nuzzling at her feet. I have a friend who's a journalist. A few years back, she worked on a feature about animal abuse. And I accompanied her to a pet center for interviews when someone mentioned that this cat had multiple fractures and was beyond saving. Keel squinted contentedly in her arms, a fluffy ball of cuteness, utterly devoid of any trace of its prior suffering. At that time, my friend was photographing it, and I noticed its eyes were glistening, as if on the verge of tears. I felt a pang of sympathy and decided to adopt it. Subsequently, I spent nearly 7,000 or 8,000 over several months just to ensure its survival. Cheng Chen silently observed the evidently spoiled cat before shifting her gaze back to Nyan. Nyan, initially wishing to continue denouncing the mistreated animals she'd seen at the shelter, instantly fell silent under his gaze and summarized, so you must forgive its habit of puffing up. It likely endured too much suffering in the past, leaving it with no sense of security. It has improved significantly now, but in the beginning, it would go berserk at the slightest approach from anyone but me, which was quite frightening. I truly lost count of how many bedsheets were ruined during that time. He set his cup down on the coffee table, diverting his gaze as if speaking to the air. There are certain aspects of you that seem to have remained unchanged. She let out a dry laugh, too apprehensive to respond. Just past 1 a.m. The presence of a solitary man and woman in the room lent an air of ambiguity even to their conversation about pets. Nyan was uncertain when he would leave but felt too shy to inquire directly. Instinctively, she thought to ask if he wanted to watch a movie, only to deem it inappropriate to suggest such a thing at this hour. After much internal conflict, she tentatively asked, Did you just get off the plane? Would you like something to eat? Cheng Chen frowned habitually. I suppose I might be a bit hungry. Nyan seized the opportunity to escape to the kitchen, saying, I'll make you some noodles. After ensuring he was well fed, he should be on his way, right? Yet, to her dismay, upon emerging from the kitchen with a steaming bowl of noodles, she found Cheng Chen had already dozed off on the sofa. His outer garment was draped over the armrest, leaving him clad only in a short-sleeved shirt. His hair fell slightly over his forehead, partially obscuring his eyes. Shuabi lay quietly in front of him, and the scene of one man and one dog appeared remarkably harmonious. Nyan, both amused and exasperated, held the bowl of noodles until she burned her fingers, prompting her to grimace as she quietly turned off the living room lights and returned the noodles to the kitchen. What could she do? How could she not let an old acquaintance rest in the living room? After all, wasn't it common for a group of men to sleep in the living room during school reunions? She ate the noodles she had prepared for Cheng Chen, ultimately filling her own stomach. Then, she rummaged through her bedroom for an air-conditioning blanket and brought it out. The coffee table was quite close to the sofa, and after estimating Cheng Chen's height, she worried that he might bump into it if he turned in his sleep, so she cautiously moved it further away. Turning back, she gently unfolded the thin blanket and lightly draped it over him. Shuabi suddenly jolted awake, but upon seeing her, promptly closed its eyes again and nestled back against Sheng Chen, falling into a peaceful slumber. The next morning, she awoke to find the living room empty. On the table lay a neatly folded piece of paper, inscribed in a delicate blue handwriting, "I'm busy today, left early, will be in touch." She refolded the paper and casually placed it in the drawer of the TV cabinet. Throughout the entire day, Keel appeared utterly listless. Keel had never been one to venture outside, nor did it have any companions. The unexpected visit from Shuabi had likely given it a taste of companionship. And now, returning to solitary meals, it seemed quite melancholic. Unsure of how to cheer Keel up, she decided to place it in her bag and headed over to Shen Weijue's house for dinner. The sounds of sizzling in the kitchen accompanied Shen Weijue's voice as she poked her head out, asking amidst the hum of the range hood, "Hey, continue your story. So your first love shot an advertisement with you." "And then what?" Yan settled on the sofa, cross-legged with her laptop, replying, "Then his dog stayed at my house for a week. Oh dear, how rude." Shen Weijue shook her head, "And then he slept at my house yesterday." Yan said, observing Shen Weijue's complexion turn pale, and quickly added, "On the sofa. He was too exhausted from the long journey. The food's going to burn." Shen Weijue exclaimed, brandishing a wooden spatula. "We'll discuss this later." With that, she retreated back to the stove, continuing her culinary endeavours. Yan stared blankly at her screen for a while, convinced there was nothing amiss, and resumed browsing the internet. Today marked the Shanghai Film Festival, and she'd secured tickets early in the day. In such an environment, one was either a dazzling television star strutting down the red carpet to gain exposure, or simply an audience member enjoying the spectacle. For a screenwriter like herself, who was neither cherished nor favored, it was better to stay home and peruse live photos. After Shen Weijue laid out a feast, she approached Yan and gently patted her shoulder. "I dare wager you have no idea what today is." Yan looked up at her, puzzled for 3 seconds. "It can't be your birthday, can it?" Shen Weijue grimaced, feigning indignation. "After all these years, you've never remembered my birthday." Yan instantly closed her laptop, picking up Keel, "Wish auntie a happy birthday, scram. You know I'm terrible at math and can't remember everyone's birthdays. It's not new." Keel, confused, gazed at Shen Weijue with wide eyes. Shen Weijue, unable to take out her frustration on the cat, patted its fluffy head. "It's an intelligence issue. I refuse to believe you can't remember any birthdays, especially your first loves. Do you remember November 11th? Because it's so easy to recall. Yan adamantly denied. "I've completely forgotten. Didn't I say it was something from middle school? Now just a memory." The two of them enjoyed a candlelit dinner. And only then did Shen Weijue recall the Shanghai Film Festival. She turned on the television, casually tuning into Phoenix TV. "Come on, continue." Women tend to be nostalgic and easily swept up in fantasies. A glance or gesture that might seem ordinary could easily be misconstrued as a hint. One must remain composed and constantly remind oneself, "I am not a heartthrob." Yan chuckled, "I am well aware that I am not a heartthrob. Yet, I can't shake the feeling that your show isn't about law but rather about dating reality. Does he have a girlfriend now? You wouldn't know, would you? Or perhaps he is already married." Yan took a sip of water. "How would I know?" Shen Weijue sighed. "You might just be the other woman. Fortunately, it's merely a nascent stage. It's time to rein it in." Yan found herself at a loss for words. Shen Weijue's typically rational demeanor had led her to remain single ever since a previous boyfriend was taken by a friend. She adopted a posture of attentive listening, pulling a plate of spicy crayfish closer and patiently began peeling the shells. "It's Cheng Chen," Shen Weijue suddenly remarked, staring at the television. "The film Enchanted is quite good. It's a rare gem. The director is more sought after than the male lead. You wouldn't believe how our station's young ladies flock to interview him." Returning with walls covered in his photos, gushing about how wonderful he is. Yan felt her heart race a little faster as she turned her head to the screen. Sure enough, there was Cheng Chen alongside the female lead. Wang Ran, walking down the red carpet, invited by the host to an outdoor interview spot. Cheng Chen naturally took Wang Ran's hand, guiding her out from his arm and standing beside her, in stark contrast to his weary appearance yesterday. Today he appeared quite composed. The host began the usual pleasantries, flattery, and inquiries about upcoming projects. Yan peeled a crayfish for a full 2 minutes, until the camera shifted to another group of stars. At which point Shen Weijue still seemed engrossed, commenting, Why is Wanaran wearing such high heels? She's practically hanging off him. Nyan tossed the crayfish meat into her mouth, when suddenly her phone vibrated. She quickly gestured to Keel, who promptly picked up the phone from the sofa and trotted over. Shin Weijue clicked her tongue in amazement. What a coincidence, it's true what they say, people are just like their pets. Only a lazy person like you could train a cat to act like a dog. She cleaned her hands. Just as she intended to retort, her gaze fell upon the name on the phone, Cheng Chen. Hadn't he just walked the red carpet? Feeling guilty, she glanced at Shin Weijue and answered the call in a perfectly casual manner. Hello. The background noise was somewhat chaotic, with laughter and quiet greetings. He seemed to have already entered the venue. Cheng Chen cleared his throat and, not knowing who he was addressing, murmured an apology before saying, Shuabi, hasn't he eaten all day? A person at the film festival, surrounded by a bevy of beautiful men and women. Renowned directors and producers, calling to say, my dog hasn't he eaten all day? Nyan thought she was already lacking in poise, only to discover someone even more laid back than herself, unsure of how to respond. She resorted to guessing, is it because of a cold? No appetite? He methodically countered, no, when it's sick, it has the best appetite. Did you give it something that made it develop a habit? Sign Yarn followed his line of thought. Struggling to reason it out, cats and dogs can easily become picky eaters, but all she had fed Keel was the dog food he provided. Right, milk, I give Keel milk every morning and evening. And it drinks alongside it. In that moment, she felt a pang of guilt as if she had committed a wrongdoing, but thinking it over, she realized she was merely taking good care of it. Ensuring it ate and drank well. What was there to feel guilty about? There was a pause on the other end of the line, seemingly as Wang Yiran said something, and Cheng Chen covered the phone briefly to respond before continuing. It should be fine. I feed it milk every day. Alright then. That's where the problem lies. Yarn let out a sigh. You see, over the past few years, domestic dairy products have been subpar. And Keel has been consuming nothing but milk powder. On the other end of the line, there was silence, so she resolutely continued her explanation, stating that it was the German imported high-need milk powder. Enriched with probiotics, guaranteed to be hypoallergenic and non-heating, ensuring that it wouldn't contribute to unnecessary weight gain. I always have my friends with children bring it for me. If you need some, I can send you a couple of boxes. She admitted that she had been rather indulgent with Keel, yet with a cat's lifespan of merely 15 years, consuming some milk powder hardly seemed excessive. After a prolonged silence on the other end, Cheng Chen finally chuckled helplessly. We'll discuss it when you return. Chapter 6, Keel and Sprite. Regarding the milk powder incident, Nyan was acutely aware of her shortcomings and deliberately sent Cheng Chen for boxes of milk powder via express delivery. Along with the address for a Daobao purchasing agent, Cheng Chen only replied with a brief text, 3 words, okay, thank you. She stood at the subway exit, momentarily lost in thought as she clutched her phone. Realizing that Shin Weijue might have been right, perhaps he had already been seeing someone, or maybe it was one of the female artists he had collaborated with, leading to the need to avoid suspicion. Suddenly, another message pinged, screenwriter, where are you? It was assistant Liu. Nyan opened her umbrella and quickly replied, the rain is too heavy, I can't get a cab, just came out of the subway. The torrential downpour splashed against her calves. Assistant Liu promptly responded, the director and boss have arrived at the cafe on the first floor of Hong Kong Plaza. As a result, she wandered around Hong Kong Plaza for a full 10 minutes. Having circled inside without finding it, forced to walk around the entire building under her umbrella, searching for a cafe that seemed non-existent. Just as she was feeling dizzy from her fruitless search, she suddenly spotted a familiar figure standing in front of the Apple store. Amidst the bustling crowd, he stood quietly, gazing down the street as if awaiting someone. What a coincidence. He suddenly shifted, casting a glance in her direction. Causing Nyan to instinctively lower her umbrella, weighing her options, she decided to avoid drawing attention. However, just as she turned away, her phone rang, clearing her throat. She answered, and before she could utter a word, Cheng Chen directly asked, where are you? Just nearby. But what if she said that? Wouldn't it mean they would have to meet? She peeked from the edge of her umbrella at Cheng Chen's location. Discreetly slipping behind the glass door, oh, I just woke up. The rain is so loud. She had to continue the ruse. I'm hanging clothes on the balcony. Many people stood there seeking refuge from the rain. And since she was on the phone, she hadn't managed to close her umbrella, receiving a disdainful glare from a passerby. "Hold on," she said, feeling embarrassed to fold her umbrella. "Is there something you need?" This position allowed her only to see his back. After a brief pause, the voice on the other end spoke with a hint of nonchalance. "I heard you scheduled a meeting with me to discuss the script. Li Xiaoqing's assistant mentioned you were almost here. With him, discussing the script." Sai Nian opened her mouth, realizing she had made a significant blunder. Cheng Chen seemed unfazed by her previous little fib and straightforwardly asked, "Where are you now?" "Almost there." Hong Kong Plaza had two sections, north and south. "Are you on the south side or the north side of the road?" The glass door was packed with people. And standing inside, how could she discern whether she was on the south or north side? Sai Nian strained to assess her surroundings, but before she could conclude, Cheng Chen pressed on. "Forget it, just tell me. Are you next to the Apple store or the Tiffany store?" There was a hint of laughter in her tone, as if she had guessed her poor sense of direction. "Apple," she surrendered, honestly revealing her location. Ultimately, the truth confirmed that she had indeed misjudged her bearings. When Cheng Chen and she finally sat down, Li Xiaoqing looked at Sai Nian with a smile, saying, "Director Cheng stepped out for a smoke and unexpectedly ran into you." Sai Nian smiled faintly, taking the menu and perusing the list of coffee options. Li Xiaoqing's company preferred urban dramas, while Sai Nian specialized in historical pieces. Although they had known each other for a while, they had never collaborated. This time, Li Xiaoqing had tantalizingly hinted at a historical film project, having sought out a renowned director to generate buzz, and without a second thought, Sai Nian had accepted. Little did she expect the director would turn out to be Cheng Chen. She glanced up from the coffee menu to see Cheng Chen using a tissue to dab at the rainwater on his clothes. His umbrella was too small, and as they crossed the street, he had nearly gotten soaked. After a few swipes with the tissue, he tossed it aside, not at all bothered by his disheveled state, and pulled out another tissue. "Director Cheng," Li Xiaoqing remarked with a knowing smile, "how come you're all wet after stepping outside for smoke?" Cheng Chen chuckled lightly. "I saw Sai Nian across the street and guessed she might have mixed up the north and south sides of the plaza. So I went over to fetch her." Water dripped from his chin as Li Xiaoqing also took out a tissue to dab at his face. A subtle gesture. Sai Nian discreetly averted her gaze. Wasn't Li Xiaoqing recently divorced? Surely not. As she found herself spiraling into chaotic thoughts, she heard Cheng Chen clear his throat. "How is your aunt recovering after surgery?" "Aunt," Sai Nian silently repeated. Li Xiaoqing laughed, saying, "My mother has been mentioning you. If you truly care about her, you should visit her in the hospital." "All right, let us get started." Sai Nian turned back, noticing Cheng Chen still wiping the rainwater from himself. Casting a glance her way that seemed to pierce through her earlier whimsical thoughts, she smiled sheepishly, thinking, "I can't be blamed. After all, your actions were so ambiguous. Who would have guessed that Li Xiaoqing is your cousin?" Over the past 2 years, she had dodged numerous opportunities to collaborate with Cheng Chen, yet she constantly heard others remark on his professionalism, the underlying implication being that he could be quite demanding. The last time they worked together on an advertisement had hinted at this, and now, as they began discussing the script, she realized he was indeed quite difficult to deal with. The materials were sent just 2 days prior, and though she had skimmed through them, it had merely been a cursory glance. Cheng Chen, however, seemed to have reviewed them thoroughly, leaving her speechless with every point he made. Eventually, even Li Xiaoqing couldn't bear to watch. Playfully clapping her hands, all right, we haven't signed the contract yet. Don't scare off my screenwriter, she's always like this," Cheng Chen summarized, casting a glance at Sai Nian. "If you don't push her, it'll take her 3 years to finish reviewing the materials." Even Li Xiaoqing's assistant exchanged knowing glances. As they departed, Li Xiaoqing and Cheng Chen headed to the post-production company, conveniently located near Sai Nian's home. Li Xiaoqing, exuding an air of confidence that Cheng Chen would undoubtedly agree, eagerly pulled Sai Nian along to catch a ride with him. Upon arriving at the garage and following Cheng Chen to his car, Li Xiaoqing immediately chuckled. "Director Cheng, you've finally come to your senses. Got a new car?" Sai Nian took a serious look at the vehicle. It was indeed quite impressive. The last time she had seen him, he had driven a much more understated car, and the change was remarkable. Directors are indeed directors, she lamented internally, wondering why there was such a vast chasm between directors and screenwriters. As it was rush hour and the rain was torrential, The drive was not smooth. Li Searching retrieved 2 cans of cola from the refrigerator and handed one to Sign Yarn, saying, I remember in my 20s my husband and I were quite poor. Barely able to afford rent, yet he always dreamt of how we would buy a car in the future. Every time he rode his bicycle with me, he would pretentiously ask, how about this BMW? Do you? I had no choice but to play along, shouting, accelerate, overtake, overtake. How foolish we were, Li Xiaoqing finished, glancing at Cheng Chen with a smile. No man can resist a car. Cheng Chen smiled faintly, steering onto the elevated highway. Suddenly, Li Xiaoqing recalled something and turned back, curiously addressing Sign Yan. I just remembered, Cheng Chen once mentioned that his first love was very fond of cars. Did I? He appeared completely indifferent, as if it had nothing to do with him. Is that so? Sign Yarn could only force a laugh, offering a vague response. Back then, he had just enrolled at the Shanghai Theatre Academy and dragged me along to car shows. I asked him why he was daydreaming about extravagance before even earning money. And he told me something that has stuck with me ever since. Cheng Chen casually turned on the music and continued driving. Sign Yarn suddenly felt curious about what he had said but also sensed a subtle awkwardness, making her hesitant to pursue the topic further. Li Xiaoqing, evidently oblivious to the nuances between the two, continued, he said he and his girlfriend had a pact that they must buy a nice car to reenact a scene where they stop a bus. Like in an idol drama. Isn't he that adorable? He was quite charming as a child. Li Xiaoqing laughed joyfully while Sign Yarn felt a sense of disbelief. Back then, he would often chat with her at the public telephone booth outside the school, listening intently as she gushed about her latest obsession with some idol drama, engaging in trivial conversations that seemed utterly pointless. She remembered excitedly pointing at the television. The female lead ran away, and that guy drove to stop the bus. Oh, how romantic. Yet, despite her enthusiasm, he remained silent, absorbing her words without offering any commentary, which left her feeling slightly annoyed. Cheng Chen, are you even listening to me? Amid the cacophony of passing cars, he slowly responded, I heard you. When we finally have the means to buy a nice car, you must ride a bus at least once, and I'll chase after you with all my might. He insisted on her dressing very much like Cinderella, preferably in a school uniform, adding, I'll be as extravagant as I can, and I must stop the car right in front of the bus, regardless of traffic rules or public decency. He spoke with utmost seriousness, yet she found herself laughing uncontrollably, spilling her yogurt all over herself as she chimed in, yes, yes, just don't forget to jump out of the car dramatically, fling open the door, and grab my hand, whisking me away under the gaze of everyone. What a light-hearted conversation, and who would have thought he still remembered it? As time passes, Li Xiaoqing sighed, uncertain whether she was lamenting her own circumstances or those of another. Look at me back then, happily perched on my husband's bicycle, and now, who knows how many times he has changed his ride, yet the one seated beside him is no longer me. She glanced at Cheng Dao, pondering who his first love might be entwined with now. Sign Yarn felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her and chose to remain silent. Sign Yarn. Cheng Chen suddenly called her name. Huh? She tightened her nerves. He pulled the car over to the roadside. It's quite congested now. I'll drop you off at Jing'an Temple, and you should reach home in about 5 minutes. All right, she sighed in relief, thank you. Upon arriving home, Keel's eyes sparkled with hunger. She retrieved the cream puffs she had bought while getting out of the car, only to discover that Keel had become increasingly finicky, refusing to eat the outer pastry and persistently clawing at it in search of the ice cream within. Nyan could only chuckle helplessly as she tore the milk pastry apart, scooping out the ice cream to feed it to Keel. Keel was a purebred Persian cat, inherently lazy, yet gentle when not ruffled. She pondered how its previous owner could have had the heart to break its leg. Just as these thoughts crossed her mind, Cheng Chen sent a text message. She hesitated, glancing at the name on her phone, apprehensive about the content, unable to articulate her feelings. Keel, particularly sensitive to the sound of her phone, incessantly poured at it until, in exasperation, she finally picked it up to take a look. A brief message read, take care of your materials, I'll reach out to you in a few days. Chapter 7, Those Fleeting Clouds. Consequently, due to that single message, Sign Yan did not venture outside for 3 consecutive days. Each day was spent lounging on the sofa, munching on sunflower seeds while reviewing materials. Typically, she would devour a generous handful of seeds, while Keel would nibble on a small pile. For a full 3 days, both human and cat nearly reached the point of nausea from their seed consumption. Fortunately, it turned out that Cheng Chen's mention of reaching out again referred to scheduling another meeting rather than seeking her out privately. Li Xiaoqing, with her engineering background, had a penchant for employing various data analyses to dissect scripts. Thus, Sai Nian, with her purely liberal arts background, found herself in the meeting room, melancholically subjected to the relentless scrutiny of the data analysis team. The topic at hand was, how many female leads does this production require? On the whiteboard, an array of women with varying personalities were listed, each entangled in endless relationships with the male lead. The narratives portrayed him as a victim of circumstance, caught in responsibilities thrust upon him, or as a lovesick individual who, despite his deep affections, faced tragic outcomes. Percentages were even calculated, estimating each woman's potential popularity. She observed the expressions of the men in the project team, a blend of resignation and satisfaction. Did they truly believe themselves to be the male lead? What a time this is! Was there still a Liu Xiaohui among them? She glanced at Cheng Chen seated across from her. Seemingly deep in thought regarding the analysis presented by each data analyst, she sighed inwardly, continuing to nibble on an apple, replenishing her vitamins. In these days of relentless effort, she was anxious to ensure that this celebrated director would not be displeased. How's it going? Li Xiaoqing suddenly opened the meeting room door and poked her head in. The room fell silent. The 4 branches of the company were perpetually hosting numerous meetings for new productions daily. Due to Cheng Chen's influence, this group was favored by the top boss, Li Xiaoqing, and thus, they exerted themselves even more diligently. Cheng Chen tapped his fingers on the table. Sai Nian, what's your perspective? Sai Nian, biting into her apple, mumbled indistinctly, what do you think is good? Why does this feel like a marketplace discussion? 12 gold hairpins, each with its own charm. Which do you prefer? Cheng Chen picked up his cup, his calm demeanor silencing the room. Eventually, even Li Xiaoqing, standing at the door, could no longer restrain herself. Isn't it just a matter of selecting a female lead? Hurry up, let us wrap this up and get some food. She leaned against the doorframe, waiting expectantly. He raised the glass cup in his hand. I've been under the weather these past few days. Let me sip some hot water first. After taking a sip, he continued, that childhood friend is quite good. I like that kind of relationship. One is enough. What does the screenwriter think? Sai Nian continued munching on her apple, pretending to contemplate seriously before cheerfully replying. I also enjoy that kind. The group spent the entire day discussing various relationships, yet no one had anticipated that the director would favor this particular type. Some were unwilling to concede, arguing that such relationships were often portrayed poorly and rarely stood out. Cheng Chen, however, seemed unfazed, casually sipping his hot water while asserting, that's a problem for the screenwriter. Sai Nian focused on her apple, and as she continued, she inadvertently bit into a bitter segment, realizing she had consumed most of the core. Thus, one statement from the director reinstated the one-man one-woman structure, returning to the innocent pairing of childhood friends. I knew it, Li Xiaoqing must have slipped her daughter a dumpling. Director Cheng certainly favors that. The steaming dumpling was delicate. She picked up a few strands of ginger, combining them and stuffing them into her mouth. Nian Nian, Li Xiaoqing's daughter had always been friendly towards Sai Nian, displaying a demeanor far beyond her years. Despite being merely a teenager, she bore the air of an older sister, careful not to burn her mouth. Sai Nian grinned, whispering, I'm 6 years older than you. Call me sister. Li Xiaoqing caught the exchange clearly, intrigued. You two have become quite close. Haven to you, but it's good. Ever since Lulu met Sai Nian, her grades have skyrocketed. Sai Nian chuckled awkwardly. It was a long story not meant for outsiders. I was inspired by Sister Sai Nian. Lulu shrugged. She made me realize that there's always someone better. Sai Nian shot a glance at Lulu, pleading silently for her to stop. Everyone present had witnessed the formidable prowess of the boss's only daughter, speeding, partying, skipping school, dabbling in everything, yet now she had turned her focus entirely to her studies. Suddenly intrigued by Lulu's words, especially Cheng Chen, who seemed to regard Sai Nian with newfound seriousness. Do share your experiences? A middle-aged man at the adjacent table expressed interest. I frequently encounter parents of my son's classmates, and I'm eager to exchange educational insights. Li Xiaoqing laughed. Sai Nian, don't you have a boyfriend? How did you accumulate educational wisdom? Sai Nian mumbled an uncertain millimeter feeling guilty as she avoided Cheng Chen's gaze. After a few exchanges, she had already polished off all the ginger in her small dish, signaling to the waiter standing nearby for another serving. As she turned back, she found herself locking eyes with Cheng Chen. Their gazes collided, and to her surprise, he remained unfazed, looking back at her with composure, feeling as though she had been caught in an indiscretion. Sai Nian quickly averted her gaze, regaining her composure. She returned to her dumplings, only to find Lulu had already launched into a speech. Everyone has their pride. I excelled in elementary school, but once I hit middle school, I fell behind and was constantly scolded by teachers, which made me rebellious. Thankfully, Nian Nian taught me a lesson with her own struggles. Wait, what did she say? Cheng Chen suddenly interjected, following Lulu's train of thought. Lulu grinned widely. She told me, grades don't matter. I once scored 38 on a math test out of 150 and was second to last in physics. What trials and tribulations haven't I faced? With that, a hush fell over the room. No one had anticipated the screenwriter had endured such a tumultuous academic journey. Sai Nian felt tears welling up. Her secrets had been laid bare, leaving her authority in shambles. Cheng Chen responded with a thoughtful hum, prompting Lulu to continue. Later, I thought, if such poor grades could still lead to prestigious universities, it's simply unjust. I can't be worse than her, right? At the very least, I should aim for Tsinghua. Li Xiaojing nearly died laughing, coughing for a long moment before responding. Why don't you learn from your uncle? He was directly admitted without ever taking an exam. Lulu replied helplessly, that's a matter of intelligence. Listening to my uncle's glorious tales since childhood has only served to dampen my spirits. Nian Nian is the true inspiration. Thus, after this young lady's expose, the entire dining room successfully transitioned from a discussion about monogamous relationships to an exploration of Sai Nian's academic struggles and her eventual miraculous turnaround. On the way back to the company after dinner, once Lulu had departed, Li Xiaoqing finally questioned Sai Nian, how did you suddenly gain clarity? Or are you spinning tales to deceive my daughter? Sai Nian glanced at Cheng Chen through the rearview mirror. Since he had excelled academically, she didn't want to bring shame upon him. Hence, such matters of youthful romance, when utilized wisely, could indeed be quite beneficial to society, especially when the person one admired was commendable in both looks and character, and academically proficient as well. The discussion continued late into the night at the company, and by the time Cheng Chen's voice had grown hoarse, signaling it was time to let everyone go home, Sai Nian noticed he had no intention of leaving. After hesitating for a full minute, she finally asked, I just requested a small bag of ginger strands from the restaurant, intending to brew some ginger ale for Keel when I got home. Would you like me to prepare it for you here instead? It's good for warding off the cold. Her fondness for ginger ale had reached an almost obsessive level. What others used to fend off the chill was her favorite winter beverage, with a hint of spice and the aroma of ginger. She had summoned the courage to ask, yet surprisingly, Cheng Chen did not respond immediately. I recall you mentioning you started drinking ginger ale, didn't you? She remembered him saying this at her home, and if he hadn't mentioned it, she certainly wouldn't have dared to inquire. Given his previous disdain for it, I occasionally drink some, he finally voiced. Curiosity piqued, she mused. Was it similar to how she had once loathed green beans but now adored dry-fried string beans? A perplexing and inexplicable transformation. Ultimately, she made her way to the pantry to brew the ginger ale, unable to restrain herself as she watched the bubbling pot. What prompted your sudden fondness for ginger ale? She asked. Didn't you used to detest it? Silence enveloped them, an unusual stillness lingering in the air. Why was he not speaking? It was already awkward enough. She was at a loss for words, yet he remained indifferent. Sai Nian felt trapped and with a thick skin. She turned around to find Cheng Chen sipping from the half can of cola she had left behind, taking monotonous sips, merely gulping it down before swallowing. The problem was, he quickly finished the half can. You just had a cold drink, will you be able to handle ginger cola later? She turned back, noticing the water was almost boiling. With a hint of complaint, she feared she might sound too nagging. Swallowing her words, not boiling ginger will cause heatiness. If he couldn't get up tomorrow, she would feel like the culprit. At that moment, unable to find him, he crumpled the empty can and tossed it into the bin beside him. Wondering if she was upset with him since she didn't seem to like the things he enjoyed, eventually, she tried drinking the cola he liked and amusing the cat he adored, gradually finding nothing unacceptable about it. Sai Nian grasped the kettle, her hands somewhat weak, nearly losing her grip on the pot. Why was it that despite his calm demeanor she felt so distressed? She turned around about to say something when Cheng Chen's phone suddenly rang. He glanced at it, hung up, and seeing her staring intently at him, he chuckled and asked, "What's wrong? Do you regret giving up such a fine young man?" Chapter 8. Those fleeting clouds. His tone was casual. Yet each word slipped into her ears, leaving her in silence for an extended period. Looking down, she poured a steaming cup of ginger cola and handed it to him. "Indeed, I deeply regret it." She could discern the sincerity behind Cheng Chen's words but spoke a blunt truth in a joking manner. After saying that, she quickly turned to pour herself a cup as well. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Cheng Chen gazing at her intently. All the previous calmness vanished, the hot water burned her fingers through the glass, yet he remained motionless, afraid he might utter something related to the past. She cleared her mind, staring blankly at the ginger slices floating in the cooler. The tea room's wall lights were perpetually on, and the atmosphere felt increasingly ambiguous. Just as her heart raced, she suddenly heard the voice of the duty staff, seemingly inquiring about who was still at the company. Nyan felt as if she had grasped a lifeline and immediately called out, "There's still someone in the tea room." After a short while, the elderly lady peeked in, smiling. "Director Cheng and the screenwriter are here." After saying this, she dutifully turned on the overhead lights, asking why they hadn't left yet. "Good thing I came to check. Otherwise you two would have been locked in the company." Cheng Chen smiled faintly. "We are discussing the script." That night, Sai Nian insisted on taking a taxi home. Seeing her determination, Cheng Chen said nothing further. When they had nearly finished discussing the script, Li Xiqing finally brought up the issue of casting. Many roles had already been predetermined, but the male second lead remained a matter of contention. This character was a possessive man, a lovesick fool who adored the female lead above all else, as cliché as one could get, yet it was precisely such an unchanging archetype that made whoever played it famous. Li Xiqing wanted to promote the company's rising star, but the investors preferred the recently popular Xinjie. Cheng Chen had yet to voice his opinion. That evening, while dining at Nanmanting, Sai Nian, grasping the fragrant roasted foie gras, contemplated for a long time before stating her position. "I want to cast Xinjie. He is perfect for period dramas. Just look at his portrayal of Naylan Ronguor." A rather youthful employee beside her immediately chimed in. Yes, it's simply iconic." The other women, holding skewers of grilled meat, nodded in agreement. Xinjie had gained fame through period dramas, his elegant attire and tall stature having captured the hearts of many young girls. Had it not been for the big boss's insistence on promoting internal talent, they would have been rallying for him long ago. Cheng Chen chuckled but remained silent, mechanically fiddling with his lighter while listening to them passionately discuss Xinjie. Director's assistant Liu Xie pushed over a small plate of green chilies, subtly signaling Sai Nian to continue advocating for the greater good of their female colleagues. This glance made Sai Nian feel guilty. She genuinely believed Xinjie was suitable. Unlike these women with ulterior motives, she picked up a chili and took a small bite. "I suggested him for my last project, but unfortunately, he refused to cut his hair." Before she could finish, a sharp spiciness surged up, forcing 2 lines of tears from her eyes, yet she dutifully concluded her sentiment. "Still, I believe he is the only choice for the male second lead." After she spoke, she cast a subtle glance at Cheng Chen. He was about to light the cigarette he had between his teeth, and upon noticing her gaze, he raised his lighter, indicating she should wait until he finished. Only after a soft click did he speak. "Do you really want him?" Fearlessly, she nodded, completely disregarding Li Xiqing's wishes. Cheng Chen pondered for a moment, then picked up his phone and silently sent a text. Soon, a soft ping indicated a reply. All eyes were on him, awaiting his response. He should be interested, but he also had another film seeking him, and their schedules coincided. If you want to give it a try. Prepare the script outline by tomorrow. He set down his phone, stating he would discuss it further once he reviewed it. The crowd erupted in cheers, while Sai Nian's lips twitched. A script outline? She hadn't written a single word. Fortunately, Cheng Chen didn't take advantage of her predicament. Since it was a unanimous request, he chose a few key personnel to take to his home for an all-night work session. Thus, after finishing their overtime, they rushed out to buy copious snacks and beers, heading to Director Cheng's house to continue their all-nighter. As soon as the door opened, Shuai caught a whiff of Sai Nian's scent and abruptly halted its charge toward Cheng Chen. pouncing into Sign Yarn's embrace instead. Sign Yarn laughed, intending to comfort it softly, but then noticed 5 or 6 pairs of eyes fixed on her. The silence was unnerving. Everyone knew that dogs only recognized their own. Sign Yan chuckled awkwardly. My home is nearby. I ran into Director Cheng while walking the dog. The crowd, understanding, responded with a collective "oh." Cheng Chen found it amusing and called out to Shuebai. However, Shuebai ignored him, continuing to lick Sign Yarn's palm, clearly very familiar with her, far beyond mere coincidence. Sign Yarn forced a smile and added, I fed it lunch and meat last time, so it probably remembers me fondly. The crowd nodded in comprehension, responding with another "oh." Just as they finished speaking, the assistant screenwriter Dong Xiao dashed out of the elevator, excitedly crouching down to pet the dog, asking, what is its name? So cute, Shuebai, someone replied. Our Dong Xiao was taken aback. What a coincidence, isn't he your cat named Kohler? His words struck like a bell, and the crowd finally realized whether or not the pets were involved in any romantic entanglements remained uncertain. But the rumors of the two owners' romantic escapades seemed confirmed. Sign Yan found herself at a loss for words, while Cheng Chen wore a nonchalant expression, leaving her to numb herself, thinking, what is the big deal about ambiguous rumors? What film crew doesn't have a dozen flirtatious topics? But Shuebai indeed contributed to everyone's speculation, trailing her all night long, even following her to the bathroom, standing guard outside. By the time they finalized the script outline at 4 in the morning, Shuebai was still lying at her feet, waiting drowsily for her to take it to bed. Sign Yan, feeling helpless, had no choice but to lead Shuebai into the guest room under the watchful eyes of everyone. Cheng Chen's residence had a master bedroom and 2 guest rooms. Since Sign Yarn and a producer were both women, they naturally occupied one room, leaving the remaining for men to squeeze into the other guest room. To accommodate them, this guest room was a small suite with a private bathroom. Although it appeared seldom used, the basic toiletries were all in place. Noticing the producer was still on the phone, Sign Yarn entered the bathroom first, enjoying a hot shower. Just as she was drying her hair with a towel, her phone rang and she hurriedly wrapped herself in a towel and rushed out. Smiling at the woman, I'm done, you can go now. As she finished speaking, she was taken aback by the caller ID. It was Cheng Chen, wasn't he just next door? Why was he calling? She answered, leaning against the window to keep her voice low, what is up? Is there something in the guest room you need me to bring over? Apart from that reason, she couldn't think of anything urgent that would require him to contact her at such a late hour. Especially secretly, there was a moment of inexplicable silence on the other end before he said, you're sleeping in my room tonight, pack your things and come over. Sign Yan was stunned, thinking she had misheard. The signal isn't great, can you repeat that? Cheng Chen's voice was already somewhat awkward, and her question made it even harder for him to express himself. He cleared his throat and continued. The person in your room is rather special. It wouldn't be convenient for you to share a bed with her. This time, she understood clearly, but what could possibly be inconvenient about sleeping with a woman? She stammered, going to your room at this hour seems even more inconvenient. Another silence ensued on the line and he finally sighed, get dressed and come over. Just say I want to discuss the script outline with you all night. Wasn't this a case of covering one's ears while stealing a bell? Everything was already set. Who would he be fooling? But Cheng Chen didn't give her a chance to think it over and hung up immediately. Sign Yan could only get dressed properly, vaguely informing her roommate that the director had suggestions and she needed to revise the script, advising her not to wait up for her. Inside, her roommate expressed surprise, chuckling that the director truly was a workaholic. Sign Yan complained a bit more before leaving the guest room. The distance from the guest room to the master bedroom was only a few meters. She hesitated for a full 3 minutes, not daring to knock on the door. In the depths of night, as she stood outside the director's door after a shower, an unsettling sensation of self-presentation washed over her. The more she pondered, the more disconcerted she became, prompting her to turn back. Yet, reflecting further, she hesitated to provoke Cheng Chen and took a couple of steps back toward the door, grappling with her indecision. After all, weren't they merely discussing the script? Resolutely, she summoned her courage and rapped gently on the door. As the door swung open, a delicate scent of mint wafted out. Cheng Chen appeared to have just finished his bath. His hair still damp, holding a towel in one hand and gesturing for her to enter. Both were freshly washed and stood before each other, the atmosphere growing increasingly awkward after a prolonged silence. Chen Chen raised his chin in exasperation, indicating the adjacent guest room. You've been lingering at my bedroom door, aren't you afraid of being caught by them? Laughter erupted from the guest room. Adding to her discomfort, with no further hesitation, Xianyan stepped inside. The bedroom was furnished with a large bed, clothes strewn haphazardly across the carpet, leaving no space to sit. Chen Chen settled on the edge of the bed, towel in hand, drying his hair while motioning for her to make herself comfortable. While I was showering, it struck me that she is fond of women. Sharing a bed with her is akin to sleeping with any ordinary man, he stated, pausing briefly before continuing. Thus, it would be preferable for you to sleep here tonight, while I shall take the floor. She mulled over his words thrice, realizing the implications with a sense of frustration. Even if that woman possessed a masculine demeanor, she was still outwardly a woman. While Cheng Chen was undeniably a man, it seemed evident that this arrangement was far more perilous. Moreover, she had no qualms regarding the woman's preferences. Xianyan observed him retrieving a fresh pillow and blanket from the wardrobe, feeling increasingly uneasy. Perhaps I should sleep in the living room, she suggested. Why would you deliberately choose to sleep in the living room? What would she think? Cheng Chen naturally rejected the notion. It made sense. She held no prejudice, yet the woman might misinterpret the situation. Ultimately, she resolved to firmly maintain that they were merely discussing the script. Resigned, she perched on the edge of the bed, her hair still dripping, having scarcely dried it earlier. As she absent-mindedly grabbed a towel to wipe away the water trickling down her hair, she reflected on whether her earlier appearance had raised any suspicions. At that moment, Cheng Chen glanced back at her, abruptly halting all movements. Confused, she looked at him, sensing the dampness of the towel in her hands and instantly comprehending his unusual demeanor. The towel she held was the very one he had just used to dry his hair. I am sorry, she hurriedly returned it. I picked it up absent-mindedly without realizing. He remained silent as he retrieved another towel from the wardrobe, approaching her with a casual demeanor. It's all right, I only used it to dry my hair. Nothing more. She thought. I never assumed you meant otherwise. Accepting the towel, she began to wipe her hair in haste, feeling warmth flood her cheeks, her neck turning crimson. Chapter 9. Those fleeting clouds. As they conversed, Shuibai, the dog, merely wagged its tongue in excitement, alternating its gaze between Xianyan and Cheng Chen. Xianyan continued to dry her hair while observing Cheng Chen swiftly making the bed. Shuibai, in a fit of exuberance, leapt onto the freshly arranged bed, rolling about and creating a mess. This troublesome dog. Xianyan stifled a laugh, yet dared not give in to mirth as she continued her task. Just as she thought she had escaped the embarrassment, Shuibai seized her slipper and burrowed beneath Cheng Chen's comforter with great pride. With one foot bare, she stared at the bulge beneath the blankets. Utterly dumbfounded, Shuibai, Cheng Chen remarked, tapping the dog through the covers. Shuibai remained unperturbed. Instinctively, Xianyan withdrew her foot behind her other leg, overwhelmed by a peculiar sense of desolation. In the mere 5 minutes since she had entered, she had used his towel to dry her hair and had her slipper hidden within his bedding. Thankfully, it was his dog. Otherwise, one might think she had plotted this. Given her status, she refrained from lifting the comforter, waiting anxiously for him to act. Fortunately, Cheng Chen showed no hesitation, promptly ushering the dog out and retrieving her slipper from its mouth, placing it at her feet. It's not usually like this. It must be excited to see you. She merely uttered an "oh," unsure of what to say, ultimately falling silent. With Cheng Chen before her, she felt too embarrassed to openly extend her foot, opting instead to bend down to retrieve her slipper. Unexpectedly, he reached out simultaneously, nudging the slipper closer to her. It felt so natural, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. In the stillness of the night, with him so casually seated in front of her, she felt an inexplicable stirring within her. After a prolonged silence, she finally asked, "So shall I sleep here?" Cheng Chen nodded and turned off the light. She climbed into bed, wrapping herself snugly in the covers. Yet sleep eluded her. The silence in the room was profound, save for the faint light filtering in from the window. It was an utterly absurd reunion, thrust upon her unexpectedly, with no preparation, as she was gradually pushed to reacquaint herself with someone she had cherished years ago. The most nonsensical aspect was that, at this very moment, they were sharing a room. She struggled to find sleep for half an hour, daring not to turn over, yet remaining wide awake. "May I ask you a question?" "Go ahead," he replied. "When you first saw me," she continued, fixated on the floor-to-ceiling window where his shadow lingered. When you saw the real me, were you disappointed? I mean, no offense, I'm just curious. The shadow in the glass suddenly shifted as he reached for a bottle of water and took a sip. It was no different than I imagined, he said, completely equating to nothing. It took her a considerable time to drift into a dream, where a group of people gathered around to dine, just as the dishes were served and before she could take a bite. Cheng Chen earnestly looked at her and said, "It's time to get up. Oh, I want to eat." What does getting up have to do with anything? Suddenly, a cool sensation brushed against her cheek. Rousing her fully from sleep. In her blurred vision, she saw Cheng Chen half squatting by the bed. "It's morning. If you don't want them to see you, let us take the dog out for breakfast." Beside him, Shuabai's bright eyes were fixed on Xin Yan, eagerly wagging its tail. Xin Yan felt like crying in her grogginess. These two never allowed her to sleep in, yet he made a valid point. As she strolled in the morning breeze, she lamented the realization that he was, indeed, often right. The two wandered through the nearby green space, enjoying breakfast, a mix of Eastern and Western cuisines, packing several portions to take back to his home, where none of the others had yet stirred. Xin Yan, fearing her meal would grow cold and unwilling to endure the torment of solitude, began waking each of them cheerily, saying, "Breakfast will get cold soon." What she thought was a seamless plan quickly unraveled when the female producer emerged, casually inquiring, "Why didn't you come home last night?" Silence fell, a palpable hush enveloped the room, save for the sounds of milk and soy milk being consumed. The assistant writer, Dong Xiao, laughed awkwardly. "Director Cheng, this soy milk tastes delightful." The topic felt absurd, and no one responded. Xin Yan's heart bled at the thought. How could you be a writer with such lack of substance? Luckily, the producer seemed to recall something, promptly burying her head in food, while the group feasted as if indulging in gourmet delicacies. Only the sounds of eating and drinking filled the air. To facilitate script discussions, Cheng Chen brought Xin Yan along to Shinja's home. Shinja was on the phone with his agent when he opened the door, greeting Xin Yan with a brief hello before retreating to the kitchen. This left Xin Yan in a daze, while Cheng Chen, familiar with the surroundings, retrieved 2 pairs of slippers for them from the shoe cabinet. Following Cheng Chen inside, she glanced at the kitchen and discovered Shinja was cooking. Since his debut, Shinja had predominantly starred in historical dramas. Although they had never collaborated, he had long been etched in Xin Yan's mind as the quintessential ancient costume heartthrob. Now, this heartthrob stood at the stove in athletic wear, skillfully preparing dishes while casually saying, "Please, make yourselves comfortable." I knew Xin Yan would come, so I cooked. Xin Yan was momentarily taken aback, glancing back at Cheng Chen. The latter acted as though he hadn't heard, settling on the sofa and gesturing for Xin Yan to join him. Shinja, a culinary expert, efficiently completed 7 dishes in half an hour. Finally, as he presented a plate of spicy chicken, the ancient costume heartthrob smiled and said, "Xin Yan, I've wanted to meet you for a long time. Sorry for the lack of hospitality. I can't go out to buy groceries. And the assistant only brought back what I'm not good at cooking." He continued, but the impact of his initial statement left Xin Yan somewhat speechless. Instinctively, she glanced at Cheng Chen, who was pouring drinks. "He cooks quite well. During our shared living days, I often enjoyed his meals," Cheng Chen remarked. "I drank beer." Shinja chimed in. "What do you mean by quite well? Every time you got drunk, it was me who made you porridge. You insisted on different flavors each time." Xin Yan felt a chuckle bubbling up. If she didn't know Cheng Chen's preferences were for both men and women, she might have thought they were deeply in love. With a couple of swift motions, Cheng Chen opened 2 cans of beer, handing one to him. Xin Yan, observing their camaraderie, felt reluctant to refuse. "I've primarily written historical dramas. It's a pity we've never had the chance to collaborate." Shinja took a sip of beer, gesturing for her to eat. "Let us not discuss work while eating," he said, smiling at Xin Yan for a solid 3 seconds before continuing. "Why did you break up with director Cheng back then? I've never understood how someone so perfect could be so heartlessly abandoned." Xin Yan felt tears welling up. Turning to gaze at the victim of abandonment, she finally comprehended why Cheng Chen had hesitated for so long when she mentioned Shinja. Cheng Chen cleared his throat. "That's enough." Shinja chuckled lightly, effortlessly steering the conversation away, and began to recount his first encounter with Cheng Chen. At that time, both he and Cheng Chen were merely students. Strangers in a bar, each finding the other exceedingly unappealing. I remained silent, matching his pace as he downed a can, and I followed suit until I was nearly inebriated. Suddenly, a wave of exhilaration washed over me. And just before collapsing, I seized his hand, snatched his phone, and dialed my number. His life, post-high school graduation, had always felt like an unwritten page to him. Nyan listened with rapt attention, and when the story reached this juncture, she couldn't help but exclaim quietly, "So corny." Later, when I sobered up, I forgot to reach out to him until my roommate graduated, which reminded me of his existence, someone who seemed quite suitable to be my roommate. Shinja served Nyan a generous bowl of red bean rice and inquired, "Why would I want to rent with you?" I replied, "I can cook," and thus, we struck an instant rapport, living together for 3 years. Nyan nodded and took a bite of her meal. Then, she heard Shinja's voice asking, "When did you two reconcile?" A morsel lodged in her throat, causing Nyan to cough violently, tears streaming down her face. Fortunately, Cheng Chen quickly intervened to deter Shinja, and after the meal, the ever-popular Shinja was left to tidy up alone. Once the table was spotless, he solemnly picked up the script outline and began to read. Nyan observed that while he had been jovial moments ago, his current expression resonated with the essence of Shinja as seen on screen. After a while, Shinja glanced at Cheng Chen and asked, "You chose the characters, didn't you? Why do you have such a penchant for childhood sweethearts?" Nyan fell silent, her gaze fixed on the tea leaves in her cup, with power that could rival nations, wealth beyond measure, and tragic tales that could haunt humanity. How could one end up a foreigner in death, all for the sake of a childhood romance? Shinja erupted into laughter. "Cheng Chen, my good brother. Have you finally thought of me for such a destined role?" Cheng Chen looked at Nyan and remarked, "The screenwriter insisted on you." Chapter 10. A sudden wave of jealousy once Huazhuang finalized its cast. Li Xiaoqing wasted no time in preparing for the press conference. This time, she truly invested heavily. Even assembling the media list was a daunting task. The most significant aspect was Shinja's involvement. Nyan wasn't particularly interested in celebrity gossip, aside from Liu Xia, who, as a youth magazine editor, was keen on digging into star scandals. She would occasionally inquire about the latest buzz, only to relay it later. Thus, when Liu Xia informed her that Shinja was embroiled in scandals, making him the perfect candidate for promoting the new drama, Nyan was genuinely taken aback. All right, she admitted, she had come to accept that Shinja harbored a secret affection for Cheng Chen. The press conference was held at the Four Seasons Hotel, and at Shinja's enthusiastic invitation, she decided to make a brief appearance. Dong Xiao, as the assistant screenwriter, was attending his first launch conference and was immediately starstruck. Eagerly searching for his idols. In his words, all four female leads were his inspirations. Consequently, Nyan found herself alone in a corner, contemplating a discreet exit after the conference. Kayla had been throwing tantrums lately. Cheng Chen, being a workaholic, often neglected to feed Kulir on time, so she had to rely on the cleaning lady to provide 3 meals a day. To exacerbate matters, upon learning this, Cheng Chen had nonchalantly entrusted the cleaning lady with caring for Sprite as well. Thus, Kula was now sulking. She speculated that it was either due to her favoritism towards Sprite or because the cleaning lady's milk formula was unpalatable. As she navigated through the buffet, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, a hand suddenly grasped her arm. Turning around, she was greeted by the beaming face of Shinweiju. Nyan, my classmate. Nyan was taken aback. Aren't you a legal documentary filmmaker? When did you switch to entertainment journalism? Shinweiju stepped back slightly and replied, in your previous life, I came with him. The dazzling crystal chandelier and the radiant smile before her were captivating. Those bright, dark eyes and the soft, sleek black hair left Nyan wide-eyed, covering her mouth for a moment before finally exclaiming, "Oh my God." After uttering those words, she tightly grasped Linshan's hand. Smiling at him for an eternity, unable to articulate a third word, "You haven't changed a bit." Linshan, however, was the first to speak, maintaining his gentle tone. "Neither have you." Nyan smiled back, marveling at how he had remained an ethereal, delicate youth over the years. "Are you now in entertainment journalism?" Shinweiju rolled her eyes. Was this truly a woman nearing 25? She seemed to revert back to the age of 15. Linshan remained composed. "Just a temporary gig. Everyone else has other commitments, and since this is Cheng Chen and Shinja's annual grand production, I had to come for a personal interview." Nyan exclaimed, "Who are you interviewing?" Linshan chuckled and nodded toward Cheng Chen. Thus, Xi Yan found herself gripping Lin Shen's hand tightly, instinctively turning to see Cheng Chen and Xinzhi standing together. Both smiling in their direction, one with a mischievous grin, the other with a more complex expression, initially intending to avoid the interview and reconnect with Lin Shen after they finished their work. Xi Yan was caught off guard when Cheng Chen and Lin Shen struck up a lively conversation, effortlessly arranging to grab a late-night snack together. Xi Yan, along with Xinzhi and Shen Weiju, naturally accompanied them. As Shen Weiju sat down, her first words were directed at Xinzhi. "Xiaozhi, do you remember me?" Xinzhi smiled. "Of course, a few years back at the Oriental Wind and Cloud Awards. You were in the inner circle and greeted me." Shen Weiju immediately seized Xi Yan's hand. "Did I not tell you I once pursued a little star?" "That was Xiaozhi. I specifically attended the Oriental Wind and Cloud Awards that year, just as I mentioned." Xinzhi chuckled, took a sip of beer, and glanced at Cheng Chen. The implication was clear. "See, my fanbase knows no age boundaries." Xi Yan felt her worldview disintegrate. Fragments of memories flooded her mind. Shen Weiju had once admired a little star, rumored to have emerged from a singing competition, and it seemed that Xinzhi debuted around the same time. Over the years, Xinzhi had been in Shanghai, while Shen Weiju had attended the Oriental Wind and Cloud Awards in her senior year. Claiming to have exchanged pleasantries with her idol. "All right then," she looked at Xinzhi. "I see, she mentioned it when she returned. While in the inner circle, I was drinking water when suddenly, a man sat beside me, and to my astonishment, it was the little idol I had been searching for." "Xinzhi, that was you, right?" Xi Yan declared, immediately pulling out her camera. "I'm taking charge. I solemnly declare, tonight, I'll capture 100 photos of you with your idol." Xinzhi's lips twitched as he glanced at Cheng Chen. Unable to suppress his thoughts, "Your first love is quite bold." "First love?" Shen Weiju, still reveling in the joy of meeting her idol, was stunned, as if she had seen a ghost at midnight. Even Lin Shen, who had remained silent with a smile, was taken aback. Cheng Chen simply removed her glasses and, wiping them with a napkin, slowly summarized, "She's always been this way." Then, she put her glasses back on. Consequently, Shen Weiju felt her understanding of life crumble. "You two must have broken up ages ago." Xi Yan shot her a glare, as if to say, "Duh." Cheng Chen remained silent, raising her glass to clink with the two men before taking a sip of beer. Shen Weiju, perplexed, glanced at Lin Shen. "That's a relief. Otherwise, I would genuinely fear for your previous life being hunted down." Xi Yan's mind buzzed, sensing impending doom. Before she could respond, Shen Weiju began earnestly introducing Lin Shen. "Lin Shen and I were university classmates. Studying media, however, it's quite peculiar. He seems to have taken a liking to Xi Yan, and they both think highly of each other." I suggested they should just be together, yet they remained so awkward. Ultimately not ending up together. Xi Yan felt her strength drain. This girl was seriously distorting the facts. The key was that Shen Weiju's tone was always a blend of softness and flirtation, adding a hint of charm to her exaggerated recounting of a distorted rumor, painting vivid images that sparked the imagination. So, they referred to each other as previous lives. What did that mean? It implied a past affection that had no fate in this life. Shen Weiju concluded her remarks after sipping some juice. The entire private room fell silent. Not only Xi Yan, but even Lin Shen seemed momentarily frozen. What did it mean to spread misinformation? A living example right before them. Xi Yan forced a laugh for a long while before clearing her throat. "She's just joking. I merely think Lin Shen is really handsome," appreciating his looks. "Why does it still feel so ambiguous?" Just then, a silence hung in the air. Lin Shen cleared his throat. "Don't misunderstand. Xi Yan and I have no relationship whatsoever." Only then did Shen Weiju realize she had misspoken and dared not utter another word. Quietly taking out her phone to text Xi Yan, "Wasn't your first love long over?" Xi Yan glanced at her phone, closed her eyes, and decided not to continue this debate with the woman. By the time the evening concluded, Xi Yan intended to take a taxi home, but Cheng Chen merely patted her shoulder. "Wait for me at the door, I'll take you home and stop by to see Sprite." On the way, Xi Yan thought, "It hardly sounds like your dog." She desperately sought an excuse to flee but felt inexplicably guilty. After all, he was her first love and her only boyfriend. The comments made earlier, the misunderstandings. She felt a twinge of remorse. To her surprise, they had arrived at her home. Cheng Chen did not mention anything about the events of the evening. Instead, he inquired about the book she had written in her spare time. I heard from Li Xiaoqing that you wrote a book. Would you like to show it to me, perhaps for adaptation into film or television? Sai Nian, feeling somewhat guilty, replied, no need. My target audience consists solely of innocent women. What is the story about? He pressed. It's a sweet and loving tale, devoid of misunderstandings or conflicts. It chronicles a journey from acquaintance to parenthood, without even a single quarrel. Sai Nian sighed, reminiscing about the months spent writing the book, during which everything seemed tinted in shades of pink, overflowing with happiness. Cheng Chen cast a glance at her. Recently, adaptations that seem to succeed tend to revolve around themes of tragic love, as they are more relatable. Sai Nian looked at him in surprise. How do you know about tragic love? Lulu told me. Sai Nian responded with an "oh," smiling as she remarked, I believe my narrative is quite relatable as well. The perspective from which one observes can greatly alter their sense of happiness. For instance, consider a young couple living in poverty, burdened with various troubles, fresh graduates struggling to find their footing in a cramped rental, while also supporting their younger siblings' education. Isn't he that relatable, quite realistic and somewhat helpless? Wouldn't you agree? Cheng Chen chuckled softly. Such a realistic theme. Sai Nian nodded, smiling as she tilted her head to look at him. If it were up to me to write, I would depict a pair of impoverished lovers who, despite their meager earnings, find joy in the simplest of pleasures. They could enjoy picnics in a free park, fish at a reservoir on weekends, and then return home to prepare the catch in various delightful ways. During meals, the young man would tenderly peel the fish for the young woman, demonstrating thoughtfulness and care. Ultimately, it's the same pair. If you focus on the painful aspects, your subconscious amplifies the suffering. If you concentrate on the happy moments, your happiness quotient skyrockets. Keel and Xuebing lay quietly at Sai Nian's feet. The soft glow of the wall lamp compelled their conversation to become more subdued. Sai Nian, Cheng Chen beckoned her over. Sai Nian found his gesture slightly strange, yet obediently walked over. Cheng Chen patted the space beside him, and she complied, sitting next to him. Keel and Xuebing mimicked her, settling down beside the two. After Sai Nian sat down, Cheng Chen fell silent, comfortably leaning back on the sofa. Meanwhile, she, the rightful hostess, sat upright with hands neatly placed on her lap, growing increasingly anxious. It's already midnight. Director Cheng, you wouldn't be planning to stay over, would you? Chapter 11. A sudden burst of jealousy. Cheng Chen suddenly said, let me see the revised script. Sai Nian immediately breathed a sigh of relief and rushed back to her bedroom, retrieving a neatly printed stack of A4 papers to hand to him. Would you like me to turn on the bright lights? No need, she responded with an "oh," playfully stepping on Xuebing's back, engaging it in a game. Understanding the cue, Xuebing rolled over and lay on the floor. Keel meowed and leapt onto Xuebing's belly. As Sai Nian marveled at the harmony between the two, she heard Cheng Chen call her name, Sai Nian. Turning back, she noticed him pointing to a specific line. Tell me. The pupils suddenly constrict. How do you expect the actor to portray that? Huh? She looked at him in astonishment. It is simply a reaction to something frightening, causing the pupils to shrink. Cheng Chen nodded, removing his glasses and gently massaging the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. I understand now. Tell me how it should be acted out. Sai Nian was taken aback. This was indeed a serious question. Xinzhi's acting skills likely hadn't he reached the point where he could convincingly portray such a reaction. Last time, a friend of mine was working on a film, and Cheng Chen put the script on the sofa. His assistant, seeing the line moving like a startled rabbit, actually went out to catch a rabbit. Sai Nian chuckled lightly. That is quite amusing. Thus, at times, using clear and comprehensible words can yield better results and prevent misunderstandings. Sai Nian responded, well, I merely intended to convey that he is genuinely terrified. However, when the actor receives the script, they typically ask me, Director, how should I portray this? Cheng Chen leaned against the sofa, moving closer to her. What do you think should be done? That posed a dilemma. Sai Nian gazed into his eyes, striving to envision a scene of terror, observing those dark eyes reflecting the light from the lamp. She examined his nose, his lips. It seemed, somehow, that he was not quite aligned with the concept of fright. The room fell silent, the ticking of the clock resonating, echoing from her ears to her heart. Long ago, they had discussed a certain topic. At that time, perhaps her youthful heart had stirred, leading her to brazenly inquire about whether a kiss would be appropriate upon their first meeting. They had engaged in a serious conversation over the phone for quite some time. considering their mutual endearments as husband and wife necessitated addressing such formalities, and then, suppressing her heartbeat, she could still sense his breath. I think I should revise the script. She struggled to change the subject. A hint of a smile seemed to form at the corner of his mouth. All right, change it to greatly startled, and let Shinger improvise. Okay, the ticking of the clock grew louder. It's not usually this loud. Chen Chen leaned forward, placing his hand over hers resting on the sofa, gently clasping it in his palm. His hand felt warm, rendering all her senses indistinct. She bit her lip, gazing at him, unflinching. If you're set on it. Once you lean in to kiss me. I'll consider it a reconciliation. They were so close, she could see him genuinely smiling, such a charming smile, just as she was about to close her eyes. A sharp meow from a cat startled her into opening them. A white blur shot straight towards Cheng Chen. It was over. Si Nyan lunged for the cat but only managed to grasp its tail. Keel yelled, its emerald eyes turning to fixate on Si Nian. Kelly is jealous, she explained with a dry laugh, quickly scooping up the cat and whispering soothing words, unwilling to glance back at Cheng Chen. At this pivotal moment, Shuabing remained remarkably calm, not even lifting its eyelids. Once Keel finally settled down in her arms, she lifted her gaze to the wall clock. It was 12:30. Chen Chen patted Shuabing's back, and the dog obediently trotted to the kitchen, lapping up some water before lying down at the entrance of the living room to keep watch. I'll review the script again. You should get some rest. With that, he picked up the stack of A4 papers, meticulously examining the script as if he were genuinely engrossed in it. Si Nyan felt trapped, having no choice but to concede. I'll go fetch you a pillow and blanket. He merely grunted in acknowledgement, not bothering to lift his head. If it weren't for Keel's interruptions. Si Nyan supported her head with her hand. Trying to read emails at the small table on the balcony, despite the pile of work before her, she found it impossible to concentrate. Thankfully, Hua Zhuang had already commenced filming, and Cheng Chen had traveled to Xinjiang. Far away in the Gobi Desert, amidst the vast sky, thus, she felt compelled to tirelessly negotiate new scripts to continue her pursuit of financial stability. As the late autumn sunlight enveloped her, she began to feel drowsy when suddenly, a message notification from Shen Weijue flashed on her QQ. Shen Weijue, oh my, I'm about to be consumed by jealousy over you and your past life. Si Nyan, Shen Weijue, go ahead. Check out your stagnant social media presence. Si Nyan, the social media account doesn't even carry my real name, just a few small readers from that previous novel, other than Shen Weijue and the editor. I hardly know anyone in real life, so I've grown accustomed to the desolation. To her surprise, there was a particularly stirring comment that tagged her. Bro, what kind of people did you associate with during your vibrant university days? Nyan Nyan, this remarkable girl once guided me to read that book about flowers and dreams, awakening my youthful heart. Once, I was even hazily enchanted by that tale of a previous life. Oh, how the waters of Westlake have marinated me beyond recognition. Now, upon our reunion, how can we untangle the threads of fate across several lifetimes? Si Nyan instantly felt awake, bubbling with joy. It was Lin Shen. Without a moment's hesitation, she set aside her previous script dilemma. Responding with a smile, I fondly recall our first meeting when you delivered snacks to someone in my dormitory at midnight. I was utterly mesmerized by you. Afterward, our entangled fates led us here. And now, years later, on this auspicious day, can we consider it a karmic reunion across 9 lifetimes? Cradling the cat in her arms and with her foot resting on the dog, she felt increasingly amused. Soon, someone replied, Cheng Chen, there are some issues with the script, come to Xinjiang to discuss. Not only did he tag her, but he also posted it on his own social media account, within 3 minutes. She was tagged in over 3,000 comments from Cheng Chen's fans. Only 3 individuals sent her private messages. Shen Weijue, oh my, your first love is jealous. Shinger, Xinjiang welcomes you. Don't forget to bring me some dumplings. Lin Shen, har 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 har. Si Nyan nearly pulled out a handful of cat fur, responding to Lin Shen privately. How does he even know about my social media? Lin Shen, didn't you notice that your first love and I are mutual followers? The air conditioner hummed with warm air, yet she felt cold. This was truly troubling. After much deliberation, she decided to call Cheng Chen. Probing whether she truly needed to go to Xinjiang, winter was fast approaching, and their actors received hefty salaries. For the sake of money, they could endure the cold, but why should she, merely a bystander? Subject herself to such discomfort, the phone rang for quite some time, and just as she was about to hang up, Cheng Chen finally answered, "What's the matter? Is there an issue with the script? I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Si Nyan communicated with good humor. It's not too significant. Si Nyan let out a silent sigh of relief. It was best to discuss it in person. When negotiating terms between individuals, the most dreaded response is the word preferably. The meaning here is quite apparent. It signifies that there is no need for a rejection, as this is the best resolution. Thus, as a rather powerless screenwriter, she had no choice but to immediately rush online to search for flight tickets after Cheng Chen's indifferent attitude led to the abrupt end of their phone call. Originally scheduled for a flight at 4 in the afternoon, she was informed upon arrival at the airport that it had been cancelled and rescheduled for much later time. At 23:40. She would arrive at Uremi Airport, followed by nearly 3 hours of travel to Jamusar County. Tonight was a night shoot, and as she stepped out of the vehicle, the crew had just finished their work and were gathered for a late-night snack. In such frigid weather, everyone was huddled around a modest stove, eating. As Sai Nyan approached, her assistant Chin Xiao, with a beaming smile, had already placed a large pot of spicy hot pot brought from Uremi. On the ground, Sister Sai Nyan has just landed. I found a place to buy this specially. In the desolate land at around 3 in the morning, a pot of fragrant hot pot suddenly appeared. Who would care about its authenticity, especially when everyone was utterly exhausted and frozen? Sai Nyan glanced at Cheng Chen by the stove, who had inevitably tanned a bit after spending so many days here. Nevertheless, his wheatish skin tone was quite appealing. Our Shinja seemed pensive. This is something our director Cheng loves to eat. How fortunate for the screenwriter. Si Nyan shot him an annoyed look. An actress named Tang Jia, with her face wrapped in a scarf, remarked casually, "I adore spicy food, but the climate here is harsh. I'm afraid my face might break out. You all enjoy. I'm off to sleep." She stood up, hugging everyone and repeatedly expressing her gratitude for their hard work. When she reached Shinja, he was too engrossed in his food to acknowledge her. At Cheng Chen's side, he had just set down his chopsticks and was about to say something to Sai Nyan when Tang Jia walked over and gently said, "Director, you've worked hard." As she spoke, she extended her arms for an embrace. Dong Xier was left speechless, while Sai Nyan glanced at Cheng Chen and swiftly averted her gaze, whispering to Dong Xier, "You'll need to get used to it. It's quite normal in a film crew, like family." "You've worked hard today," Cheng Chen said, casting a faint glance at Sai Nyan. "You mentioned there were unclear parts in the script the other day. And now that the screenwriter is here, you two should discuss it over lunch tomorrow." "All right, thank you, Director Cheng." Tang Jia smiled, gracefully withdrawing her arms, and departed. The chatter and laughter continued among the group. It seemed that the request for a hug to take a break was something everyone had long grown accustomed to. Sai Nyan, Shinja pulled over a small stool and placed it between him and Cheng Chen, saying, "Come, let us discuss the script." In the dead of night, discussing trivial matters felt pointless. Sai Nyan suddenly felt a wave of melancholy and sat down, staring at the pot of hot pot with discontent. "Look at these peppers, their color so deep, they must not be fresh, and with so little blood, they've thrown in so many vegetables. How heartless, in short." It was thoroughly displeasing. Shinja likely sensed the shift in atmosphere and was solely focused on snatching food from the pot, falling into a complete silence. Cheng Chen's voice was low. "Tang Jia is the only one who does this. Everyone is used to it." All were seated on the other side of the stove, with only the three of them together. When others saw them talking, they couldn't overhear their conversation and most likely assumed they were discussing the script. Sai Nyan responded with an "oh" but remained silent. Cheng Chen continued, "I've never hugged her. Don't misunderstand." "I'm not misunderstanding," Sai Nyan replied, glancing around. "I've never hugged her either." Shinja felt it necessary to lighten the mood. Sai Nyan and Cheng Chen both turned to him simultaneously. "I didn't say anything." Shinja, sensing the mood, promptly fell silent. Cheng Chen cleared his throat. "Since you're here, I'll take you around tomorrow morning. There are some lovely sites nearby. Aren't you discussing the script with Tang Jia tomorrow?" Sai Nyan casually picked up a pair of disposable chopsticks, fiddling with the contents of the pot, and grabbed a piece of luncheon meat. The spiciness made her gasp, and she immediately began to cough. A bottle of water was handed to her, a personal thermos. "Take a sip, eat slowly." Weariness seeped through his words. Yet his voice remained clear and gentle. Chapter 12. A sudden fit of jealousy. Nyan took the thermos, staring at the opening for a long moment, unsure whether to drink or not. Just drink, Shinja said in a hushed tone. Cheng Chen's obsession with cleanliness is notorious. He wouldn't mind you, as it's just for you. I remember once when I was utterly parched and couldn't find a single bottle of drinkable water on set. He just kept sipping from his bottle, letting me suffer in thirst. Nyan had taken a sip earlier and nearly choked. Thanks to Shinja's remarks, she successfully shifted her focus and quietly asked him. Just gossiping, do you really like men? Shinja was taken aback, then laughed. I genuinely like women, 1000% prefer women. Nyan pursed her lips, using the stove's glow to scrutinize him. What kind do you like? Around my age, someone who understands what I say, independent, preferably with her own career. Shinja pondered seriously. Someone who can comprehend me, who can hold me when I'm facing harsh words. Aren't you almost 30? You like women around that age? Shouldn't you prefer younger models? Nyan suddenly felt immense respect for Shinja, but upon recalling the latter part of his statement, she felt it was amiss. As long as you're willing. During harsh moments, those wanting to embrace you would probably be lining up. It's different, Shinja said with a smirk, suddenly looking a bit shy. Most of my fans are still students. I always have to think about setting an example for them. However, being my girlfriend means you'll see the imperfect side of me when I'm feeling down, like when I curse or throw things. She remained silent for a moment, sipping more water. The wind here was strong. Despite the stove, it was still somewhat chilly. Suddenly, she felt a weight on her shoulder as Cheng Chen took off his cold weather jacket and draped it over her. Nyan instinctively turned to look at him, suddenly stirred by the deepest of memories. That distant early romance had its myriad sweet moments, all stemming from his voice and a series of characters online. The greatest regret was that they had never truly touched. She looked at Cheng Chen, and he looked back at her. His jacket was oversized, hanging down to the sand below, just as she was inexplicably moved by this gesture. Cheng Chen abruptly diverted his gaze, quietly saying, knowing you were coming to Xinjiang, why didn't you wear warmer clothes? The sentiment she had begun to express was abruptly stifled. Nyan sniffled, angrily continuing to drink water. Draining his supply, if not, how would it showcase the director's consideration for the screenwriter? Cheng Chen glanced at her again. How long are you planning to stay angry? I'm not angry. Nyan replied with a dry laugh. I mean, Shinja is truly helpless, he sighed while struggling to fish out the last blood clots from the pot, shaking his head. If you're capable of arguing. Don't you suppress your voice? Cheng Chen and Nyan both turned to look at him. Shinja completely set down his chopsticks. I'm full. The next day was another night shoot. And during the day, Cheng Chen took Nyan out to explore. To avoid suspicion, she specifically gathered a few people she usually conversed with, when a few of them were waiting for Cheng Chen downstairs at the hotel. Tongjia happened to come down first. I just saw Director Cheng. He mentioned wanting to take a stroll. Since the screenwriter is here, I thought I'd accompany him, discussing the script while wandering. Nyan remained silent. After a while, Cheng Chen leisurely emerged, accompanied by Shinja. Once everyone got into the car, the screenwriter's assistant Dong Xiao became excited, incessantly asking if they would visit the Northern Court ruins or Qianfu Temple. Shinja immediately laughed. Don't believe what you read online. When you actually see those so-called historical sites, they are merely crumbling walls. Today's just for wandering around. Director Cheng has some matters to discuss at a hot spring resort. Is it for the director's next film? Tongjia interjected, glancing at the driving Cheng Chen. Cheng Chen responded with a nonchalant millimeter, not elaborating further. Speaking of new films, Shinja quickly interjected, I just remembered a friend went for approval a few days ago for a project called 33mm of Love. But it got outright rejected. Why? Dong Xiao inquired. Nyan also found it perplexing. Thinking it over, the title sounded somewhat painful and sorrowful, but it shouldn't warrant outright disapproval, right? A male producer beside them chuckled. The reviewers are becoming increasingly stringent. They undoubtedly well-read. Come on, tell us. Tong Jiar, curious, grasped the producer's wrist. The director's assistant Liu Qingqing finally couldn't hold back. It's the diameter of that thing, the size used for preventing AIDS. I remember it's a medium size. Such an obscure statement left everyone silent for 3 seconds before laughter erupted. Even Cheng Chen's lips curved into a slight smile. Nyan stared at Cheng Chen. Pondering a rather unkind question, how many girlfriends had he had after her? No, wait, she didn't he even know if he had a girlfriend now? Thus, throughout the journey, the conversation blossomed around this topic. Continuously discussing various amusing gossip, adult topics inevitably carried a hint of ambiguous edge, and Cheng Chen occasionally chimed in, only Sai Nian feigned ignorance. Shinju frequently introduced various subjects and eventually steered the conversation toward first loves. Wasn't he that topic too pure? After the screenwriter's assistant Zhong Xiao finished recounting her affair with the teacher, and the director's assistant Liu Qingqing shared how he wooed a college junior. Everyone reminisced in a haphazard manner. Shinju, smiling, turned to Cheng Chen. Speaking of my acquaintance with Director Cheng from university, I knew he had a first love in high school, yet I know nothing of the related pink-hued love stories. Seated in the front passenger seat, Sai Nian wanted to kick him but couldn't he, so she could only let him finish. Everyone's eyes sparkled with anticipation, waiting to hear the gossip. Just then, the car came to a stop at a red light. Cheng Chen pressed the brake, remaining silent. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. As the red light persisted and the crowd relinquished their hopes of gossiping, he suddenly spoke. It was an online romance. This statement fell like a deep-sea bomb, igniting the flames of intrigue among the onlookers. Continue, Shinju urged, bubbling with excitement, for he alone was aware that the other principal was seated in the second row behind him. The sensation of being the only sober one amidst a drunken revelry was exhilarating. At that moment, I was idly leveling up when a figure clad in a short skirt approached me, exclaiming, "You're incredible, your name is simply too powerful." Then, in the next breath, she added, "Let us get married. Having your name as my husband would be so stylish." I recalled that this character was seldom used on the server, a girl in a blue micro skirt with a hairstyle reminiscent of a maid, her head seemingly adorned with two blue cloison bowls. Sai Nian felt an overwhelming urge to bang her head against the glass. Shinju coughed for a while. "What name did you choose?" "Jesus." Dong Xiao let out a long "oh." "So your wife's title must surely be Jesus' Lady." How wonderfully East meets West. Shinju could hardly contain his laughter, turning to Sai Nian, screenwriter. "I never imagined our director Cheng had such an absurd first love." Sai Nian glared at him through clenched teeth. "Indeed. So, fine, perhaps it was she who took the initiative at the beginning." She gazed out at the scenery, reminiscing about the past. She had indeed been taken aback by his name, never expecting him to accept, thus leading to their marriage, since they bore such a title. They would surely have to chat every day. Initially, upon hearing that I was from Beijing University-affiliated high school and still in my second year, Cheng Chen leisurely continued, "Naturally, I assigned all the second-year exam questions to you. If the game was too complicated, I just added you on QQ, and thus, they transitioned from discussing exam questions to conversing about life and aspirations." "Right," Tong Jia interjected, "she never engaged me in discussions about life or dreams. Only lamented how foolish this teacher was and how biased that one was." Cheng Chen had already driven into the resort. Her academic performance was poor, and I even doubted she would graduate. Sai Nian gazed at the scenery in despair as the car came to a halt. Was this truly how he predicted his own fate? And then, no one exited the vehicle. The topic was simply too innocent and intriguing. There was no and then, Cheng Chen pulled out the car keys and got out. No resolution, Dong Xiao lamented, first loves rarely end with a conclusion. Liu Qingqing summarized. It is said that Director Cheng topped the cultural subjects for the Drama Academy entrance exams. Tong Jia, as his junior, felt a swell of pride. Such a young girl would inevitably end up in a vocational school, with no prospects for advancement. Perhaps years later, when they crossed paths again, she would be holding a child, earning change at the corner shop. Sai Nian rolled her eyes. Superficial, corner shops are splendid. Any milk tea shop on Nanjing West Road makes tens of thousands each month. In truth, scripts like this are subjected to the whims of directors. Sai Nian genuinely struggled to find her purpose in attending. By lunchtime, several people could no longer endure and directly rented rooms at the resort to sleep. Only then did Cheng Chen summon her to his room to engage in idle chatter. Sai Nian's mind still lingered on his earlier assessment of her, leaving her devoid of energy. It was only when he handed her a warm cup of ginger cola that she realized he had actually prepared this concoction. "What are you thinking about? You seem distracted." He sat down. She held the cup with both hands. "I was contemplating your assertion that I wouldn't graduate, but you did graduate." didn't he you? Yet you once thought I wouldn't he. All right, I admit I misjudged you. Si Nhan smiled triumphantly at him. I'll book a flight tomorrow and return to Shanghai the day after. Cheng Chen observed her lowered gaze and, after a moment of silence, remarked, I remember back then, I had to offend you at least once daily, only to spend half an hour charming you back. Why are you still so prone to anger after all these years? His words were laced with humor, causing her heart to race inexplicably. She wasn't angry at all, she was merely calculating how to save time and take on more scripts to write. But Cheng Chen's mention of the past left her momentarily speechless. Suddenly, he snatched the glass from her hands and placed it on the low table beside them. Si Nhan looked up in surprise to find him standing, gazing down at her. In their previous quarrels, when he was infuriated, he would often say, if you were standing before me right now. Only to swallow the latter part of the sentence, sulking into the phone. Yet now, she was truly before him. Cheng Chen, what would you do? He brushed his hand against her cheek, still angry. Si Nhan felt her blood rush, rendering her somewhat dazed. As he slowly leaned down, she instinctively closed her eyes. Just then, a knock echoed at the door. Director Cheng, the PR company and 2 investment firms. Liu Qingqing's voice trailed off abruptly. With a loud bang, the door was slammed shut again. Si Nhan sprang up from the bed, nearly on the verge of tears. Why didn't you lock the door? Chapter 13. The failure of the first night. I forgot. Cheng Chen sighed, feeling helpless. What were we discussing? I was saying I want to return to Shanghai. It seemed not so much about where they left off, but rather about what they were doing at that moment. He retreated and sat back down on the sofa. Why do you want to go back? Si Nhan was still silently reflecting on the earlier scene, casually replying, the movie script. You're a creator too. If there are issues, you can just call me. It's not like a drama that requires extensive revisions. She continued speaking while Cheng Chen had already grasped her hand, gently pulling her closer. Si Nhan looked at him in astonishment. Cheng Chen, what exactly are you trying to do? If you want to kiss me, just do it. If not, stop being so touchy. Are you trying to lead me on? Suddenly feeling a surge of anger, she attempted to withdraw her hand, but Cheng Chen held on tightly. Come here. You first tell me what you want. Can't you tell what I want? Cheng Chen rubbed his temples in frustration. They tugged at each other, both staring defiantly. The atmosphere became charged with tension. Just as Si Nhan was contemplating whether to release his grip or continue arguing, he suddenly pulled her towards him, and without any uncertainty, she fell into his embrace. Her body was awkwardly cradled in his arms. His breath brushed against her face. Sensing her discomfort, he finally adjusted his hold, placing her across his lap. He was tall, and she was petite, fitting into his embrace effortlessly. Si Nhan, she remained silent, too afraid to move. All her earlier anger dissipated, leaving her completely disarmed. The sound of his heartbeat seemed somewhat erratic, and Si Nhan bit her lip, stifling a laugh. Shall we continue? He asked, looking down at her. Si Nhan pressed her lips together, remaining quiet for quite some time, before finally tilting her head to meet his gaze. Are you planning to reconcile? He furrowed his brow slightly, leaning in to whisper in her ear, did we ever say we broke up? A clever play on words, subtly dissolving years of separation. She gazed into his eyes, opened her mouth, but found no retort, only watched as his gaze descended, his delicate lips naturally pressing against hers. Soft and tender, the brief contact made her heart flutter, leaving her unsure whether to feel discomfort or pleasure. Her heart merely thudded slowly and heavily. Outside the door, footsteps echoed, voices mingling, and she suddenly remembered the door hadn't been locked. She opened her mouth to remind him, but Cheng Chen had already deepened the kiss, his tongue slipping in, the scent of smoke enveloping her. Si Nhan frowned. She didn't smoke and was somewhat allergic to the smell. He had never smoked during their school days. How many unfamiliar habits had he acquired over the years? Did he even dislike the smell of smoke? The brief pause allowed her to confirm. Si Nhan murmured in response, attempting to explain her aversion to tobacco, but he quickly silenced her again, leaving no room for discussion. Si Nhan blinked, finally closing her eyes, surrendering to the embrace of the smoke. If it weren't for Cheng Chen, she would have certainly pushed away any man who smoked, but how could he not be him, in all the years past? She had never associated anyone else with him. By the time he laid her down on the bed, his gaze was intensely fiery. Si Nhan managed to regain a modicum of rationality. whispering, "Cheng Chen." "It is broad daylight." He murmured an acknowledgement, releasing her, and with a swift motion, he drew the curtains shut before returning to the bed. She wrapped herself tightly in the comforter, determined not to let him uncover her. In the dim room, devoid of light, his eyes shone brightly, propped on one elbow, observing only the flushed face of Xin Yan, silent. Xin Yan felt as though she could scarcely breathe under his gaze. Clutching the blanket tightly, desperately trying to persuade him not to be so eager, "Aren't there many people waiting for you?" He glanced at his watch. "There's no rush." Then, casually unfastening the clasp, he removed his watch and placed it on the bedside table. "Back then, I couldn't find you," he said, resting on his elbow and looking at her, a hint of sorrow in his expression. "You love to throw tantrums. I thought it was just a matter of you being missing for 2 days, making me worry. I never expected it would take months to find you." Xin Yan pressed her lips together. Feeling a twinge of heartache, she had intended to buy 2 bottles of wine to get completely drunk and forget about him, but unfortunately, she ended up with counterfeit liquor. Thankfully, she was finally discovered and taken to the hospital. Those days were incredibly arduous. Afterward, he repeated a year of study. He gently pulled aside the corner of the quilt that she had grasped, unveiling her, and enveloped her in his embrace. His lips formed a captivating arc as he silently chuckled for quite some time before continuing. "You say I am nearly 30, yet every time I face you, I recall events from my teenage years." And then, she pressed him, feeling a tension despite the fact that it was clearly a thing of the past. A vast expanse of blankness loomed, spanning many years. All she knew was of his modest fame and the routine interviews that followed. He never mentioned his school days, as if it were an immense taboo. And then he appeared to be lost in reminiscence, but then, there was nothing more. Everything began with a prolonged, profound kiss. She shut her eyes tightly, surrendering to the moment, until at last, she could no longer restrain herself. Her eyes brimming with tears as she exclaimed, "I can't take it, it hurts. Shall we try again?" "No, it hurts too much." Xin Yang's tears flowed freely in accusation, while Cheng Chen dared not attempt again. Using his hands to wipe her tears, eventually, when the tears became overwhelming, he had no choice but to pull over a tissue box, wiping her face with several tissues. Xin Yang bit down on his arm in frustration, venting her feelings fiercely before asking him, "Do you even know how to?" "Theoretically, I have quite a bit of experience," Cheng Chen replied, using a napkin to dab her tears. "I've guided some intimate scenes." Xin Yang's eyes widened, her heart racing. "You haven't had a girlfriend all these years?" Cheng Chen let out a long sigh. "If I truly had a girlfriend, would you even be here?" Xin Yang suddenly fell silent. "So there were no casual partners or anything?" After carefully wiping her tears, she snuggled into the quilt, tightly wrapping her arms around his waist, feeling the heat of his body and the dampness of his skin. She suddenly made a rather absurd joke. "Director Cheng, how unfortunate you are." A manual labor for so many years. Before she could finish her thought, Cheng Chen had already yanked her out from under the covers. "Does it hurt any less now?" "It still hurts." By the time dinner was served, Xin Yang's eyes were still swollen, and she occasionally shot Cheng Chen resentful glances. The seating arrangement was comically awkward. Xin Yang sat on Cheng Chen's left, while the seat on his right was supposed to be for a producer, but unexpectedly, it was taken by Tong Jia. As soon as she sat down, Tong Jia found a very serious topic to discuss with Cheng Chen, while Shinja maintained a subtle smile, continually giving Xin Yang knowing glances. When the large plate of chicken was brought to the table, Cheng Chen first picked a piece for Xin Yang. She poked at the chicken with her chopsticks. "It has skin." Cheng Chen placed the chicken into his own bowl, removed the skin, and tossed it back into hers. She took a bite and set it down. "It's too fatty." Cheng Chen remained silent, offering her a piece of potato. "Too greasy." Cheng Chen still said nothing, turning the Xinjiang-style sour and spicy cabbage towards her. Tong Jia, however, grew more emboldened, smiling at Xin Yang with great concern. "Is the screenwriter unaccustomed to the flavors of Xinjiang cuisine? This large plate of chicken is just like that. It's most flavorful when you're used to it." Fortunately, Xin Yang simply responded succinctly, taking a bite of rice, then suddenly asked Cheng Chen, "Do you like Xinjiang food?" "Not particularly," Cheng Chen paused, adding, "I dislike it immensely." Shinja, who had been drinking, finally couldn't hold back his laughter, bursting out. Once they exited the dining hall and entered the elevator, Shinja continued to chuckle incessantly, patting Cheng Chen on the shoulder. "Director Cheng, I can't sleep tonight. How about I come to your room and we have a thorough discussion? Cheng Chen pressed the button for the third floor. There's someone in my room tonight. The elevator fell silent. And even Tong Jia, who had been buzzing all night, finally ceased her chatter. As the elevator reached the third floor, the light pinged, and Cheng Chen stepped out alone. Looking back, Xin Yang, Chapter 14, the failure of the first night. Xin Yang instinctively took a step back. Then, in a defensive manner, blurted out, Director Cheng, let us discuss the script tomorrow. What is the meaning of turning a deaf ear to a ringing bell? This was it. Cheng Chen furrowed his brow. Remaining silent, under the gaze of many, the two stood there, locked in a stalemate, until she finally surrendered, mustering the courage to exit the elevator. Once the doors closed completely, she hesitated to look at him. You wouldn't want me to stay at your place tonight? Would you? Cheng Chen remained silent, pulling out his room card from his pocket as he exited the elevator. The more he stayed quiet, the more anxious Xin Yang became. Could it be that he was angry? He had just seen Tong Jia getting too close to him, and perhaps he was just momentarily irked. Surely, Director Cheng wouldn't he be so petty, would he? It was only when Cheng Chen opened the door that she cleared her throat. About to speak, only to be abruptly swept up into his arms. Shall we continue? Cheng Chen locked the door behind him, carrying her into the room. I knew it. Xin Yang wrapped her arms around his neck, kindly reminding him, Director Cheng, I remember you have to work tomorrow. It's fine. Cheng Chen kissed her lips and laid her down on the bed. Observing his expression, she resigned herself and closed her eyes, heroically declaring, come on, I know if you don't succeed you won't rest. Cheng Chen chuckled at her. Who was it that kept saying let us try again just now? She swore she only intended to take a step back to advance. But clearly, that tactic wouldn't work on Director Cheng. She recalled the afternoon and scrunched her face in displeasure, causing Cheng Chen to break into laughter. Xin Yang, hurry, take a deep breath while I still have the courage. He sat on the edge of the bed. Were you jealous just now? A little. Did I go too far? Thankfully, his voice was low. Sometimes, a woman being a bit difficult can be quite endearing. If it were a woman I didn't like, I would find it very irritating. Xin Yang opened her eyes to see him lying beside her fully clothed, her heart suddenly softening. In fact, he had said something similar many years ago. She remembered that during that time, many little girls in the game pursued him, and she often grew furious, discarding all his equipment and selling her house just to hide in some inconspicuous corner of the game. She had no idea how many people mocked her for her dramatic displays, yet Cheng Chen would patiently search the entire world for her, tirelessly traversing every corner of the map to find her. One time, unable to contain herself, she asked him over the phone, don't you think I'm being unreasonable? He had been suffering from a cold at the time, laughing as he sipped water, saying, a girl being a bit difficult can be quite charming. Feeling sentimental, she scooted closer to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, laughing silently for a while. Do you think you owe me from your past life? After all this time, you still run into me? Cheng Chen replied with a hum, lifting her slightly. Probably. He smiled gently, and Xin Yang gazed at him intently, softly saying, do you know, you look truly beautiful when you smile. It's a pity you hardly smile while working. Is that so? He lowered his head, slowly leaning closer to her. So close that she could see herself reflected in his eyes. No. Xin Yang's tears streamed down. Cheng Chen, flustered by her reaction, held her and comforted her for quite some time before Xin Yang, filled with trepidation, said, do you think I'm somehow different? I've never heard of it hurting like this. Cheng Chen calmly wiped her tears away. It's completely normal for the first time. Xin Yang looked at Cheng Chen with guilt, hesitating for a long while before suggesting, how about you go to the bathroom, let us sleep. Cheng Chen turned off the light completely, enveloping her in his arms. After a while, the breaths beside her began to steady, indicating he had likely fallen asleep. Xin Yang hesitated for a long time before reaching for her phone on the pillow, quietly sending a text to Shen Weijue. Soon, Shen Weijue replied, aren't you in the throes of passion right now? Xin Yang almost bit her tongue. How do you know? Shen Weijue, my idol told me. He specifically called me to gossip. She was at a loss for words, unsure how to respond, when Shen Weijue quickly followed up with another message. Successful, I presume. Xin Yang, no. Shen Weijue, no way, you two are just under the covers chatting. You're both adults. What else with the pretense of purity? Xin Yang, who's pretending to be pure? Shen Weijue, though your chest may be a bit small, I reckon he lost interest upon seeing the real deal. I told you, eating more is better than anything else. Xinyan, gun it's him who doesn't he know, Shen Weijuer, you're the one who s gun do you think this is a math problem, men are all self-taught in this. Xinyan fell silent for a moment, then tucked her phone back under her pillow, turning over to wake Cheng Chen. What's wrong? His voice was thick with sleep, still not fully awake. Shall we continue? Cheng Chen remained silent, not moving. He had fallen asleep again when Xinyan shifted her position, preparing to give up entirely. She was suddenly pulled into his embrace. This was nothing like the previous 2 times. In the darkness, she felt herself grow hot all over, nervously holding onto him. Are you pretending weren't you unable to before? Cheng Chen chuckled. I was afraid you'd hurt. Every time you said it hurt. I lost my courage. Are you not afraid now? He finally sounded somewhat helpless, trying to distract her while softly saying, I feel that if we don't resolve this thoroughly, you won't let me sleep. Well, these next few days his tongue gently explored. Leaving no room for her to speak Xinyan, she felt utterly drained, her heart racing rapidly, almost to the point of numbness. After calling her name once more, she gritted her teeth and responded, softly kicking him. So sly, pretending not to know. Should we take a shower? He laughed, stroking her hair. Shall I carry you to the shower? No, she merely longed for sleep, a deep slumber from which she might never awaken. Shall I go wash up then? Cheng Chen gently coaxed her, his voice calm. It's nearly 5 o'clock, and I start work at 6. If you wish to return to Shanghai, I can have my assistant book you a ticket for tomorrow. Xinyan murmured in response, her arms wrapping around his waist. Cheng Chen contemplated saying more, but upon noticing her drifting into a state of semi-consciousness, he decided to let her rest. He removed her arm only once she had fully succumbed to sleep. Repositioning the pillow to his side, allowing her to cling to it and continue her slumber. When she finally awoke, it was already 3 in the afternoon. Groggily glancing at her phone, she noticed an unread message from Cheng Chen. Call me when you wake up. After 10 minutes of trying to shake off her drowsiness, she dialed his number. Awake, he answered, his tone devoid of emotion. Xinyan softly replied, what time do you finish work? Probably around midnight. Oh, Xinyan thought. Unable to suppress a small complaint, why do you speak so unkindly? Is it because you've had your fill, and now you've given up? A silence ensued on the other end for several seconds before Cheng Chen suddenly covered the phone and said, I am going for a smoke, and then seemed to move away before adding, if you're hungry, there's a restaurant downstairs. Fortunately, she wasn't very hungry. Xinyan casually inquired, what scene are you filming today? A bed scene. Xinyan recalled the steamy cave bed scene and felt a pang of jealousy, realizing with dismay that she was envious, although he wasn't the one acting in intimate scenes with the leading lady. He would still witness Tong Jiu's nudity, perhaps even offering on-the-spot direction. She sighed, Director, do I have the right to alter the script? Cheng Chen seemed to chuckle, today is a challenge, but you might consider adding scenes. At scenes, Xinyan tugged at the corner of her blanket, grumbling, you mean to say more steamy bed scenes, right? How about we do it outdoors, in the vast desert, or by the water of an oasis? Suddenly, voices could be heard on Cheng Chen's side, likely people looking for him to join them for a smoke, many of whom sounded familiar. He chatted with them for a moment before turning serious again, saying, I'll be back tonight, and we'll go over the script to see how we can at scenes. Xinyan was still processing this when Liu Qingqing on the other end curiously asked, why do we need to add scenes? Cheng Chen replied affirmatively. The screenwriter is eager to incorporate more intimate moments. Liu Qingqing's voice fell silent, and after a moment, she remarked, I never imagined the screenwriter would look so innocent yet have a penchant for explosive love scenes. The more Xinyan listened, the more uneasy she felt, and by the end, she finally realized, clutching the blanket tightly, that her face had flushed a deep crimson. Cheng Chen, you incorrigible rogue. Epilogue. The very beginning this affair directly led to Xinyan feeling utterly despondent upon returning to her room. And she slept soundly until deep into the night. It was only when the doorbell rang incessantly that she groggily awakened, turning over to bury herself further under the covers. The phone rang. Vibrating, ringing again, vibrating. Finally, Xinyan managed to grasp her phone, bringing it to her ear. Hello, open the door. Xinyan, clutching her phone, dozed off once more. It wasn't until she sensed the room brightening and caught the tantalizing aroma of food that she awoke. Her stomach twisting in hunger, yet still unwilling to move a finger. It was only when Cheng Chen wrapped her in a blanket and lifted her that she rested her chin on his shoulder. Wrinkling her nose, "You smell terrible." A pungent odor of smoke and dust clung to him. "Quite unpleasant indeed. I feared you might be hungry, so I didn't have time to shower," Cheng Chen said, placing a pillow behind her for support as he casually removed his outer clothing and tossed it onto the sofa before stepping into the bathroom. The sound of running water quickly ceased. He washed his hands and face, emerging shortly thereafter. Nyan was nearly awake now. "How did you get in?" "I left my ID with the hotel, claiming I was your husband." He pulled over a chair, laying out the takeout containers he had brought. Nyan watched him open the white boxes, her curiosity piqued as he broke apart the disposable chopsticks and handed them to her. "Did they really believe that?" she murmured, half in disbelief. Cheng Chen simply smiled, his hair still damp, looking weary. When Nyan met his gaze, she quickly looked away, shyly avoiding eye contact like a newlywed bride, feigning calmness as she accepted the chopsticks. "How irresponsible of the hotel, just handing out IDs. Is that all it took?" He chuckled softly, "The celebrity effect, but you're no star. The only directors regular folks might recognize are probably Ang Lee, Sui Hark, or Zhang Dardar." Cheng Chen removed his glasses and placed them on the bedside table, pinching the bridge of his nose, eyes closed as he gently massaged it. With Shinju around, he could handle nearly any situation involving married or unmarried individuals. "Shinju," Nyan exclaimed, astonished. Did he really discuss such matters in front of Shinju? Isn't he that too soon after reconciling? Cheng Chen, seemingly oblivious to her reaction, leaned back against the headboard, softly saying, "Eat up, the food will get cold." Nyan nodded, sitting on the bed, using the chair to enjoy the meal he had brought. It felt wasteful, far too much food to finish. After a while, she turned to ask if he wanted any, only to discover he had already fallen asleep, slumped against the headboard, looking thoroughly worn out. She bit down on the end of her chopsticks, gazing at his disheveled appearance, suddenly overwhelmed with emotion, inexplicably touched by the sight before her. She finished her meal swiftly, quietly got out of bed to tidy up, and then gently climbed back into bed, helping him remove his shirt. Cheng Chen wasn't in a deep sleep, aware it was her. He kept his eyes closed and allowed her to undress him. After placing his shirt on the sofa beside the bed, she hesitated as she eyed his trousers, torn between whether to remove them or not. "Let me handle it," Cheng Chen murmured, beginning to unbuckle his belt. Nyan hastily turned off the light and slipped under the covers. She sensed Cheng Chen quickly discarding his pants, and as he lifted the covers, she instinctively tensed, but he merely wrapped his arms around her from behind, kissing her back before drifting back into slumber. Nyan had spent the entire day sleeping, yet now she was wide awake. With her arms encircling his, she nestled closer, contemplating the outline and scenes of the next script, gradually succumbing to sleep once more. The following morning, he departed early. Cheng Chen's assistant had booked her an afternoon flight, and just before leaving the hotel, Nyan sent him a text. It wasn't until she reached the airport and was about to board that Cheng Chen's call came through. "I was busy earlier." "Have you arrived at the airport?" Nyan replied affirmatively, handing over her boarding pass. "I'm about to board." Nyan. He called her name. As she received her boarding pass and stepped into the jet bridge, she murmured in acknowledgement. The silence was palpable. Nyan felt certain he would say something, patiently waiting. "Director." Suddenly, Liu Qingqing's voice came through the phone. Cheng Chen responded with a quiet Tong has a promotional event the day after tomorrow. Her agency has granted her leave." After a lengthy discourse, Cheng Chen listened attentively while Nyan gritted her teeth, enduring the wait. Just as she found her seat and settled in, Liu Qingqing finally concluded her monologue. However, the plane was already preparing for takeoff. "Shubai is filming in Beijing," Cheng Chen suddenly stated. "In a few days, a friend of mine will help transport it to Hongqiao Airport. Could you bring it home for me?" Nyan nodded. The flight attendant began walking by, reminding her to turn off her phone. Cheng Chen seemed to hear the commotion, quickly adding, "I'll send you the flight number." Nyan replied again, "Don't forget to give me your friend's number." Under the gaze of the flight attendant, Nyan finally could not withstand it any longer and hastily hung up. To retrieve Shubai from the airport, Sign Yarn had arranged with Shun Weijuer to drive her the next day. Sitting in the passenger seat, she scratched Kohler's chin, who blissfully squinted his eyes, nudging her palm with his head. Shun Weijuer, driving, chuckled. This director's dog is quite different. It even gets to make cameo appearances in movies. Acting is such a hardship. Sign Yarn frowned. People are exhausted like dogs, and who knows how much more they have to endure. If you put it that way, being a star is indeed tougher than us, much tougher, Sign Yarn replied, stroking Kohler's head. If I have children in the future, I definitely won't let them become actors, waking up early, working late, overtime. No matter how big a star you are, you still have to appease others. It's really not worth it. When they picked up Shuebai, Sign Yarn's heart ached. The dog, with a beautiful coat, looked as disheveled as Cheng Chen had the night before, dusty and disheartened, especially when it was brought out in a cage. It appeared quite startled, however. Upon seeing Sign Yarn, it immediately began wagging its tail, its eyes glistening with tears. Sign Yarn had initially intended to grab lunch with Shun Weijuer, but seeing Shuebai's condition, she lost her appetite and opted for takeout to bring home instead. While Shun Weijuer devoured her meal in the living room, Sign Yarn was busy bathing Shuebai in the bathroom. Just as her hands were covered in foam, Kohler suddenly brought her the phone. The screen flashing Cheng Chen's name. Sign Yarn wiped one hand clean and answered, "Did you get it?" "Yes," she replied, nudging Shuebai, who obediently jumped into the bathtub. "Which company did you lend it to?" "It's in terrible shape. It seems no one has bothered to wash it." Cheng Chen chuckled. "We were filming outdoors, and with no facilities available, who would care for a dog?" Upon witnessing the scene, one cannot help but feel a pang of sympathy. Sign Yarn used the showerhead to rinse Sprite. Observing its inability to keep its eyes open, she immediately exclaimed, "The shower gel has gotten into its eyes. I'll call you back shortly." After hanging up, she rinsed a towel and carefully wiped the corners of Sprite's eyes. Just as she turned to fetch another towel, she noticed someone leaning against the door, gazing at her. Cheng Chen, still clad in his outerwear and wiping his glasses with the corner of his shirt, simply smiled at her without uttering a word. She stood there, dumbfounded, unsure of what to say. "I've taken some time off," he suddenly remarked. Sign Yarn pursed her lips and replied with a soft In truth, it had only been a week since they last saw each other. One of the lead actors was away for promotions, which allowed him to return. He approached her and lifted Sign Yarn, holding her for a brief moment. "Just one day," she teased, wrapping her arms around his neck and chuckling softly. He remained silent, placing Sign Yarn on the marble countertop and leaning in to nuzzle her cheek. Sign Yarn evaded him, quietly reminding him, "Shun Weijuer is in the living room, be mindful." She left after opening the door for me. Sign Yarn looked at him in astonishment. It was quite astonishing how engrossed she had been in washing Sprite that she hadn't even noticed someone else had entered the room. Now that it was just the two of them, she felt no need to hold back. She leaned in and lightly sniffed him. "Why do you smell just like Sprite?" Cheng Chen chuckled. "Should I take a shower first?" "No," Sign Yarn replied, eyeing the two Sprites in the bathtub. "I must finish washing the dog first. It might catch a cold. Just give me 10 more minutes. Suddenly, something seemed to dawn on her, and she turned to him. "Did you bring a change of clothes?" "I don't have any of your clothes at home. If you give me your size while you shower, I can go buy you a set to wear." As she spoke, her mind raced through nearby shopping centers. Then, she heard him cough. "What's wrong?" she asked, looking at him. "Just recalling some things," he murmured. Sign Yarn nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I remember when I first started university, renting a place near campus without heating. On particularly cold nights, I would think of what you said about enjoying snowy days, leaning against the heater while reading a novel, often until the early hours of the morning." He softly recounted, shifting to unrelated topics. "Back then, many girls would ask me out, though all were students from the drama academy. They still carried a certain modesty whenever I received their letters or phone calls. You were always the first person who came to mind." Sign Yarn felt her heart soften at his words, remaining silent. He gently touched her cheek with his finger. "These past few days, I found myself reflecting on this, and it suddenly fills me with dread. If I had ended up with someone like you, would I regret meeting you again later? Would I? Perhaps you could find someone better." Sign Yarn replied, her words contradicting her heart as she feared he might genuinely agree. "I would," he suddenly laughed. "When I met you, I was merely a poor student. No credit card, No mobile phone. To make a call, I had to use a payphone. It seems that aside from occasionally sending you snacks, I never gave you anything truly worthy. On Valentine's Day, all I could do was chat with you for 3 hours, trying to cheer you up. I couldn't afford a car or a house. Not even the cat you liked. Looking back, it seems I had nothing to offer except for good grades. Nyan looked at him in surprise, wanting to say something but holding back. His voice, tinged with a hint of fatigue, remained gentle and clear, reminiscent of the very beginning. She anxiously leaned closer to the phone, recalling his voice during their first call after finishing his final exams. Marking their 4-month acquaintance, they had promised to call on that day to hear each other's voices. She still vividly remembered the fluttering in her chest as she picked up the phone, struggling to utter a simple hello. On the other end, amidst the sounds of traffic, he called her name. Sprite, unable to endure any longer, jumped out of the bathtub, looking curiously at the two individuals locked in a gaze. Chen Chen, his glasses once again fogged by the bathroom steam, removed them. In his deep, dark eyes lay a multitude of emotions as he finally spoke. Back then, I loved you, and I still love you.